Chapter 288. It was late at night. It was drizzling, and the air was foggy. Outside Meng Fortress, on the peak of the mountain where heaven-breaking sword sect was stationed, there was a stone table and 4 stone stools. Wu Qi was sitting beside it, carefully tending to a small red clay stove and a small teapot made from purple sand. This was the first time Wu Qi learned that Imo's sect actually had a disciple who specialized in making tea sets. All the tea sets made by him were exquisite, just like Imo's sect's attainments in the field of weapons. The aroma of tea wafted through the air. Lu Qingfeng, Nie Yaonu, and Nie Baihong, who were sitting beside the stone table, could not help but sniff their noses at the same time. Good spring water matched with good tea leaves, and with Wu Qi's rather decent skill in brewing tea, the tea leaves harvested from a 1,000-years-old tea tree in the depth of Meng Mountains were almost completely fragrant, which was more than enough to attract everyone's attention. Drizzling raindrops fell from the sky, but were pushed away by an invisible energy barrier above their heads. Not a single drop of water could enter the area of 30 feet around the stone table. Wu Qi poured a cup of tea for each of them, then picked up the teacup himself and took a deep breath of the aroma. After that, he gulped down the boiling hot tea. A scorching hot aroma rushed straight from his throat to his stomach, then slowly rose up from his stomach. The heat mixed with the aroma of tea instantly penetrated through his internal organs, and sprayed out through every pore of his body, making him feel as if he had just ascended to the immortal realm. The rich energy contained in the tea spread through his body, and even his cultivation base of innate energies had been slightly enhanced. Good tea. Nie Yaonu tilted her head up and breathed out deeply. The green sword energy storm behind her back gradually retracted. A sword cry rang out, and the Jin Dan strange sign on her body vanished completely. Indistinctly, there was a sharp sword energy emanating from her body, as if her entire being had merged with the surrounding heaven and earth. However, the heaven and earth were still the heaven and earth, and she was still herself. Although she had merged with the heaven and earth, they had yet to merge. Nie Baihong and Lu Qingfeng were shocked. Chi rose to his feet, bowed at Nie Yaonu and said, "Mother, congratulations on forming your nascent soul." Nie Yaonu put down the teacup and smiled reservedly. Wu Qi shook his head, poured himself and Nie Yaonu a cup of tea, then said coolly, "Grand Elder, I believe it has been more than a year and a half since you formed your nascent soul." All these years, I've been pretending to be a human immortal like the Jin Dan. I've been constantly releasing sword energy and imitating the Jin Dan's energy storm. I believe I've used up quite a lot of my sword energy. I'm afraid the Grand Elder has already. Wu Qi stopped talking, raised his head and gave Nie Yaonu a deep look. Nie Yaonu gave Wu Qi a deep look as well. She said with a deep voice, "You are a smart little guy, but why is my son Baihong always so stupid? Why can't he figure it out? If his mother only had the cultivation base of Jin Dan, how could heaven-breaking sword sect become the strongest sect among all 13 immortal sects of Great Yan Dynasty in just a few hundred years? Although the cultivators of Jin Dan are competing with each other in all 13 immortal sects, how could the nascent soul ancestral masters of other immortal sects ignore this?" Nie Baihong's face turned purple. He stared at Nie Yaonu, laughed dryly and said, "Mother, this..." Nie Yaonu raised her head up. A sharp gleam flickered in her eyes as she said coolly, 270 years ago, I had formed my sword nascent soul. It was a sword essence divine pill left behind by the ancestral master. It can help a cultivator condense his sword energy quickly and step into the nascent soul realm. Unlike the cultivators from other sects, as long as we have a strong sword intent, we can shatter everything with a single sword strike. Breaking through the nascent soul realm is not a waste of my energy. She glared fiercely at Nie Baihong, who seemed to be at a loss of what to do. She breathed out a long sigh and said, "Over the years, there were some nascent soul sinecures of Great Yan Dynasty who wanted to deal with heaven-breaking sword sect. But, before they could do anything, I would sneakily injure them, forcing them to swear an oath and enter a secluded cultivation, not paying any attention to the outside affairs. These fools thought it was His Majesty Yan Dan who sent the sinecures to warn them, and as expected, none of them dared to act rashly again. Wu Qi nodded his head and said, I see. Grand Elder, you're really good at concealing yourself. Why are you no longer pretending today? Nia Yaonu let out a long laugh, stuck out her chest and said, in those years, in order to protect my son, Bai Hong, and the foundation of heaven-breaking sword sect, I had no choice but to continue pretending. Fortunately, the cultivation technique of a sword cultivator is completely different from that of other cultivators, and the sword nascent soul I formed is in the shape of a flying sword as well. I've fused it with my flying sword, refining it into my prime flying sword that can fuse with my sword. As a result, I don't have a sword nascent soul in my body, and that's how I managed to fool all the ministers of Great Yen Dynasty. She raised the teacup and gulped down the tea in one gulp, then said in a deep voice, from today onwards, we are all disciples of White Cloud Immortal Sect, and we are no longer bound by Great Yen Dynasty. So, why should I still care about those rules and regulations of Great Yen Dynasty? My cultivation base is my cultivation base, and when I need to draw my sword and kill someone, I will do it. A cold laugh came from the dark figure. Together with a few of his trusted subordinates, Yen Li came swaggering towards her. Yaonu, who are you trying to kill? Are you going to ignore the rules and regulations of Great Yen Dynasty? The reason why I'm here today is to tell you that there are some rules and regulations that you still have to. Suddenly, Nia Yaonu sprung up into the sky. A misty, green sword shadow flew out from her body, and then her body exploded, transforming into a clump of pure sword energy and fusing with the sword shadow. A glinting green flying sword, less than 1 foot and 2 inches long, flashed across the sky and pierced through the foreheads and dantian of Yen Li and the few other Jin Dan human immortals. Yen Li's eyes went wide in despair. Even until the moment of his death, he still could not figure out how Nia Yaonu killed him. He had never heard of Nia Yaonu's technique of fusing her body with her sword, and he had never seen Nia Yaonu using it. So, where did she get such a powerful and brutal sword technique? A green light flashed, and Nia Yaonu's figure reappeared. She stared at Yen Li, who was still standing stiffly even until the moment of his death, and said with a cold voice, Bai Hong, Wu Qi, Chunfen, watch carefully. This is the real sword technique of heaven-breaking sword sect, the Unity of Sword Energy script. The Unity of Sword Energy script is just the introductory technique of the Unity of Sword Energy script. Does this old thief, Yen Li, really think that he has found out all my trump cards? Yen Li's sudden arrival, and Nia Yaonu's violent killing, everything happened so fast that Wu Qi and the others had no time to stop them, and they were powerless to do so. On the same night when the entire Great Yen Dynasty had joined White Cloud Immortal Sect, Nia Yaonu revealed her cultivation base that was not weaker than peak stage nascent soul realm, and killed Yen Li and his trusted disciples with a single sword strike. Taking a deep breath, Nia Yaonu reached out her hand, grabbed Yen Li's head, and twisted it off his neck. Then, she brought the head to the edge of a cliff on one side of the mountain peak, then casually threw the head off the cliff. She cried out sternly, Damn it! Take a good look. I've killed one of the culprits who murdered you in those years. I'll never let go of anyone who was involved in the conspiracy against you. Today, I can kill as many people as I want, and I won't have to worry about their revenge, and I won't have to worry about them hurting our children. Nia Yaonu's voice was shrill and forlorn, sounding like a cuckoo crying blood. It made Wu Qi and the others' hair stand on end, and they could feel wisps of cold air drilling into their bodies. It was as if there was really a ghost hiding right beside them, quietly watching them. Wu Qi's heart was twitching. With the help of the sword origin divine pill left behind by an immortal, Nia Yaonu had formed her nascent soul 270 years ago, and now, her cultivation base had reached peak stage nascent soul realm. The cultivation technique of heaven-breaking sword sect was indeed magical, and that divine pill indeed had an incredible power. It was a miracle that she could endure for so long. There was a knife above the character endure. How many sharp knives had this white-haired old lady been stabbed in her heart? How could she endure so many years of suffering, watching Yen Li swagger in front of her and devour the foundation of the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect step by step in front of her? How strong and patient did she have to be able to sneakily develop so many disciples of Jean Dan in the inner sect of heaven-breaking sword sect under Yen Li's interference and spying? How could she be able to cultivate a city lord like Yizidu among her disciples? Nya Yaonu was a very patient person, especially when she possessed the overall strength that could easily kill Yen Li. This old lady was really scary. Once the opportunity came, she would kill her enemies like slaughtering pigs and dogs. With a casual swing of her sword, she would not give her enemies any chance to escape, nor would she waste her breath to show off her success in front of her enemies. She killed them with a single swing of her sword, cleanly and neatly. She truly had the heroic spirit of an ancient hero who killed someone in the middle of the street and settled his grudge. Wu Qi breathed out a long sigh, rose to his feet, bowed deeply at Nya Yaonu, and said with a respectful voice, "Grand Elder, Wu Qi, have great admiration for you. After all, he is the son of the Crown Prince, and now, Wu Qi is the future son-in-law of the Crown Prince. It will be very difficult for me to deal with both of them. Grand Elder, please gather all your trusted disciples and depart for White Cloud Immortal Sect right now." One figure after another emerged from the surrounding dark shadows. They were all the trusted disciples of Nya Yaonu, and some of them were carrying human heads that were dripping with blood. Judging from the appearance of those human heads, all Yen Li's trusted disciples, including Qin Shuwen, were killed by these inner sect disciples of heaven-breaking sword sect. Wu Qi was struck dumb with astonishment, and he looked at Nya Yaonu with even more astonishment. Nya Yaonu laughed out loud and said, "I'll bring all my trusted disciples to White Cloud Immortal Sect right now. Little fellow, remember that you and Baihong used to be master and disciple. Although you've acknowledged a heaven immortal as your master, in the future, you will have to bear all the energy stones and spirit herbs needed by my disciples." Wu Qi bowed and said with a solemn expression, "I don't need Grand Elder to remind me about this. I had no other choice but to acknowledge Patriarch Jiang Yun as my master. Sect leader Nya will still be Wu Qi's master. In the future, Wu Qi will take care of all the needs of Grand Elder, my master, and all my fellow brothers and sisters." After bowing deeply, Wu Qi fished out a talisman of White Cloud Immortal Sect, wrote Jiang Qingzi's name on it, and threw it out. Immediately, the talisman transformed into a stream of flame and shot out into the distance. Before long, Jiang Qingzi arrived, stepping on a cloud and standing in front of Wu Qi. With only a few words, Wu Qi explained what happened here, and the old feud between Nya Yaonu and Yen Li. Jiang Qingzi was filled with deep veneration when he heard that. He cupped his fist and bowed at Nya Yaonu, then said in a low voice, "Come with me quickly. From now on, you will have to cultivate in the 5 Swords Peak of White Cloud Immortal Sect. It is one of the core territories of Jiang clan in White Cloud Immortal Sect, and no one will dare to disturb it. Once everything is settled down, I'll go beg Patriarch Qing Wu and ask her to accept Grand Elder as her disciple." When Patriarch Qing Wu traveled the world, she was fond of killing people with swords and avenging kindness and hatred. I'm sure she will like Grand Elder. After that, Jiang Qingzi left hastily with Nya Yaonu and the other disciples, rushing towards the Grand Universal Teleportation Formation that White Cloud Immortal Sect had constructed over the past few days. With him helping Nya Yaonu and her subordinates settle down, Wu Qi would not have to worry about them. Casually, Wu Qi flicked his sleeve and rolled Yen Li and the others down the cliff. Then, he suddenly threw his head back and breathed out a long sigh. "Qingfeng, my brother wants you to stay in Great Yen, and be the chief supervisor of White Cloud Immortal Sect's mines. Are you willing?" Chapter 289. After putting away the teacups used by Nya Yaonu and Nya Baihong, Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng sat facing each other at the stone table. The two of them drank and drank by themselves. Accompanied by the light drizzle above their heads and the cool breeze around their bodies, it was a scene of the wilderness. Although they could smell a faint smell of blood coming from all directions, as Nya Yaonu's disciples had killed all the people who were loyal to Yen Li just now, both men did not pay any attention to it. What is the position of supervisor of mines? Lu Qingfeng looked at Wu Qi, feeling puzzled. For a major immortal sect like White Cloud Immortal Sect, each of them controlled an entire planet, and governed dozens, even hundreds of kingdoms of various sizes. Naturally, when governing a kingdom, there would be mortal emperors who would take care of it. However, all the cultivation resources on the planet, including all the spirit herbs, energy stones and mines, and materials produced by demon beasts, were under the unified management of their disciples. The position of supervisor of mines was responsible for the mining, refining, storage, and allocation of all the energy stones and rare metals on the planet under the jurisdiction of White Cloud Immortal Sect. In order to fight for this position for Lu Qingfeng, Wu Qi only briefly mentioned it to Patriarch Jiang Yun, and the latter immediately gave his approval. Wu Qi frankly told Patriarch Jiang Yun that the reason he asked Lu Qingfeng to be the supervisor of mines was to seek more benefits for himself and the people around him. With the great credit Wu Qi had given them by giving them a priceless planet, the small matter of Lu Qingfeng being the supervisor of mines was nothing to him. Even if Lu Qingfeng were to embezzle as much energy stones as he could, how many energy stones could he embezzle in a year? Even if Wu Qi ate energy stones like rice, how many energy stones could he spend in a year? Therefore, Patriarch Jiang Yun straightforwardly agreed to let Lu Qingfeng be the supervisor of mines, responsible for the mining of all the energy stones owned by White Cloud Immortal Sect on the planet where Great Yan Dynasty was located. However, Patriarch Jiang Yun also told Wu Qi frankly that for the sake of Lu Qingfeng and Wu Qi, Lu Qingfeng could not hold the position for more than 300 years. 300 years, no one in White Cloud Immortal Sect could say anything about it. But, if Lu Qingfeng were to hold the position for more than 300 years, and some people were jealous of him, even Patriarch Jiang Yun would not be able to suppress him. In White Cloud Immortal Sect, an important position like this, which was responsible for the exploration of the sect's strategic resources, was usually rotated every 30 years. Once a person had reaped enough benefits, he would have to give up his position so that other people of the same sect could also reap some benefits. As the saying goes, in the affairs of the world, one should not worry about scarcity, but worry about inequality. Lu Qingfeng had been in this position for 300 years, and the amount of energy stones and various energy ores he obtained was more than enough for Wu Qi and the others to spend freely for several thousand years. Therefore, he should give up his position and let the core disciples of White Cloud Immortal Sect have a share of the wealth. In a low voice, Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng were discussing all the details regarding the position of the chief supervisor of the mine. Wu Qi's opinion was that they should carry out destructive mining at all costs. Apart from the amount of energy stones they had to submit to White Cloud Immortal Sect every year, they should keep as many benefits as they could. After countless years of exploitation, the cultivation resources in Minor Heavenly Circle Realm and Liyuan Galaxy had nearly dried up. Now, they could only rely on the natural energy veins to recover the pitiful amount of energy stones every year. For the sake of Wu Qi and the others' future cultivation, Lu Qingfeng had to get himself a sufficient amount of energy stones within these 300 years. After teaching Lu Qingfeng all sorts of techniques of embezzlement and fraud, Wu Qi, who had his mouth and tongue parched, grabbed the teacup and gulped down a few mouthfuls of tea. Then, he turned to Lu Qingfeng, smiled and said, "Apart from the position of the chief supervisor of the mine, we have to continue developing in the same way. No matter it is Meng Fortress, Little Meng City, or my city on the Great Eastern Ocean, we have to make a good plan." Even though Great Yan Dynasty had submitted to White Cloud Immortal Sect, it was still Great Yan Dynasty. At most, it would lose the right to mine some energy stone and metal veins in its territory. In Great Yan Dynasty, it was still very important to own its own territory and a part of its secret forces, as they were the foundation for Wu Qi and the others to establish themselves. Both men had a very long discussion, and when the eastern sky was just beginning to brighten, they finally breathed out a long sigh of satisfaction. Picking up the teacup and taking a sip of tea, Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and asked with a smile, "Oh right, what did those people say about me during these days?" Lu Qingfeng narrowed his eyes and smiled as well. He raised the teacup up, as if he was toasting with Wu Qi. Smiling, he took a sip of tea and said, "What did they say? What else could they say? You disappeared right under their noses with Jiangqing Zi, and then suddenly arrived with so many heaven immortals and cultivators from two great immortal sections. Obviously, you have become the trusted disciple of White Cloud Immortal Sect's patriarch. What else could they say? After giving a few praises, Lu Qingfeng clapped his hands and said, "What a brilliant move, a brilliant move." I was still worried that after the alliance between the three dynasties, we would be surrounded by enemies everywhere. No matter it is Lu Buwei, Lao Ai, Duke of Longyang, or Xiang Yu, they are all people we can't afford to offend. In the future, we will have to tread carefully with every step we take, and one careless mistake will bring us a disaster. Even though you are hiding far away from the Great Eastern Ocean, I think you are just buying time. Wu Qi threw his head back, breathed out a long sigh, and said, "Indeed, going to the Great Eastern Ocean to build a new city is just stalling for time. Our enemies are too strong." Shaking his head, Wu Qi smiled bitterly and said, "For Great Yen, I've offended all these formidable enemies. But, when these formidable enemies form an alliance with Great Yen, or even become Great Yen's imperial advisor or important ministers, Great Yen will not be able to protect me." A cold gleam flashed in Wu Qi's eyes as he said coldly, "If that is the case, don't blame me. As long as I have the chance, I'll turn the world upside down, and make them lose everything. No one will be able to get any benefits from this. In Great Yen Dynasty, I'm just an insignificant minister, and anyone can find me an eyesore and trample on me. But now, I'm in White Cloud Immortal Sect, and I'm the personal disciple of Patriarch Jiang Yun. As long as we act cautiously, who dares to lay their hands on us?" Clenching his teeth, Wu Qi said coldly, "Lu Buwei. How dare he send his men of sacrifice to ambush me on the battlefield? Duke of Longyang. How dare he challenge me with his swordsmen? Xiang Yu, Wu Qi frowned, feeling a slight headache coming on. Naturally, the cunning Lu Buwei and Duke of Longyang would not rashly kill Wu Qi before they found out the exact background of White Cloud Immortal Sect. But, Xiang Yu, especially after he had turned into a fiend, who knew what he would do next? Lu Qingfeng frowned as well, and asked with a puzzled expression, "I still don't understand why that Yu Ji came to you." Wu Qi shook his head blankly, as he could not figure out the reason as well. If it was to provoke or retaliate against Xiang Yu, Yu Ji could simply find a pawn or a butcher, and perhaps make Xiang Yu suffer a few times more. So, there was no need for her to come to Wu Qi. Frowning, Wu Qi carefully reviewed what happened between him and Yu Ji. However, the information he knew was too little. Even though he had inherited the insane intelligence of Lu Xiaobai, he could not figure out all the causes and effects. Irritably, he threw the teacup far away. Wu Qi sprung to his feet, gnashing his teeth as he roared into the sky, "Damn it! I'll go to the Great Eastern Ocean now and clean up those longbow people first." With a dangerous gleam flickering in his eyes, Wu Qi planned to let those 9,900 longbow people drink the ancestral awakening and body-tempering soup first. As long as they all formed their Jin Dan, the heavenly 100-spirit warring formation of 10,000 men would be more than enough to trap a nascent divinity cultivator. At the worst, he could just kill both Xiang Yu and Yu Ji, and put an end to all troubles. A killing intent rose in Lu Qingfeng's heart as well. Clenching his jaws, he said, "In for a penny, in for a pound. Take out all the energy stone income for the next 3 years. Wu Qi, you will sneak into White Cloud Immortal Sect, find Jiangqing Zi, and beg his father and grandfather to help you kill Xiang Yu." Wu Qi's eyes flickered. It was a good idea. With the poor people in White Cloud Immortal Sect, they could really buy Xiang Yu's life with a huge amount of energy stones. As the three dynasties had just pledged their allegiance to White Cloud Immortal Sect, perhaps those senior cultivators in White Cloud Immortal Sect did not take Xiang Yu as their fellow disciple. Killing him would not be a big deal. While he was about to discuss the detailed steps with Lu Qingfeng, a white shadow suddenly walked out from behind a mountain rock not far away. Wu Qi raised his head abruptly and pointed his finger out. Immediately, the sword of greedy wolf had arrived before the man's throat, leaving a dark trail behind. Staring at the white shadow, he cried out sternly, "Yu Qianqian, how did you get here?" "You." Wu Qi's heart was shaken. Yu Qianqian had already arrived beside him and Lu Qingfeng, but he did not discover how she appeared. How was that possible? Yu Qianqian was dressed formally, with a tall crown on her head and a white robe, with a few ancient-looking jade artifacts hanging on her waist. With a flip of her palm, she revealed a talisman glinting with a faint golden gleam. She said indifferently, with the protection of this talisman, not to mention you, even a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator would not be able to discover my trace. Walking slowly before Wu Qi, Yu Qianqian grinned coldly and said, Duke of Tianyun, Duke Yanlu, you too sure have some guts. How could you plot and frame a great general of our ally here? Do you have any respect for the law of Great Yen? The law of Great Yen? It was as if Wu Qi had just heard the funniest joke in the world. He shook his head and said, the law of Great Yen? Can they control the personal disciple of Patriarch Jiang Yun? If Wu Qi still had any respect for the law of Great Yen, he would have long gone to His Majesty and told him that Yen Li was killed by someone with a sword. Staring coldly at Yu Qianqian, Wu Qi said proudly, now, Wu Qi is the same as His Majesty, the personal disciple of Patriarch Jiang Yun. Since Wu Qi and His Majesty have the same status, do you think the law of Great Yen can control me? What great general of our ally? I've killed him, so be it. Yu Qianqian pondered for a brief moment, then nodded and said, you have a point. Wu Qi, Qianqian and father have still underestimated you. We never expected that all the heroes of 6 dynasties would be toyed with by you alone. Wonderful, wonderful. You risked your life to save Jiang Qingzi, just so that you could bring White Cloud Immortal Sect here and break the current rule of 6 dynasties? Good, very good. With this, you will be like a dragon soaring in the sky, and all the enemies you made in Great Yen will have no way to touch you. Wu Qi smiled faintly and said, you can say I'm a dragon soaring in the sky, but you can also say I'm a cornered dog that will do something desperate. That's why I took a gamble at all costs. Fortunately, I've won the gamble. Now, the 2 great immortal sects own everything here, and I'm the personal disciple of Patriarch Jiang Yun. Those enemies of mine can no longer touch me, and I can spend my days in peace. Yu Qianqian nodded and praised, indeed, a good plan, a good idea. And, the rarest thing about you is that you have the drive to risk your life. If no one can kill you in advance, perhaps, your achievement will be beyond everyone's imagination. She fixed her gaze at Wu Qi, then said in a deep voice, Wu Qi, Qianqian knows that you have an engagement with Zhang Lu. But, Qianqian doesn't mind sharing you with Zhang Lu. If you and Qianqian also have an engagement, all the manpower and material resources of Yu Academy will be yours to use. Wu Qi was struck dumb, while Lu Qingfeng was struck dumb. All of a sudden, Wu Qi came before Yu Qianqian and gave her a loud slap. After that, Wu Qi let out a wild laugh and sprung up into the sky, grabbing Lu Qingfeng. Then, both of them transformed into beams of light and sped away. Wu Qi laughed wildly and said, Yu Qianqian, Lao Tzu doesn't like old women who are older than Lao Tzu. Ha ha ha, you want Wu Qi to marry you? Dream on. The sudden slap from Wu Qi made Yu Qianqian spin 3 times on the spot. She was struck dumb and could not move at all for a long while. After a full quarter of an hour, Yu Qianqian suddenly let out a strange and ferocious laugh and said, very well, Wu Qi, with this, you and I are now mortal enemies. Hee, you can come up with a clever plan, using the 6 dynasties as a bargaining chip to join White Cloud Immortal Sect, which has given you the upper hand. But, do you think Yu Qianqian is so easy to deal with? She stamped her feet, tilted her head up, spun, and transformed into a gust of breeze that drifted away. Chapter 290. In the Great Eastern Ocean, there was an island located 3,600 miles southeast of the place where Wu Qi built his city. Lord Xiansheng and Catfish Flood Dragon stood blankly on the waves, their eyeballs nearly popping out of their sockets. They stared in horror at the dark clouds that suddenly surged out of the island in front of them. They watched as the enormous power of the thunder tribulation in the dark clouds rumbled down without any time to accumulate. 108 shockingly powerful thunderbolts struck down in a disorderly manner. She patted her big head, shook her head, breathed out a long sigh and said, "Now I know why the legendary longbow people who can survive the heavenly tribulation are as rare as the sea turtles who can escape from my mouth. TSK, tell me, which one tastes better, the green-skinned sea turtle, or the blue-skinned one? I even saw a golden-silver sea turtle in the ocean the day before yesterday, and it was very chewy." Lord Xiansheng gave Catfish Flood Dragon a blank look, then shook his head and ignored her. Catfish Flood Dragon's brain was cramping and short-circuiting from time to time. Just a moment ago, she was talking about the longbow people's Jin Dan thunder tribulation, and now she was talking about sea turtles. On the island, Wu Qi was hovering in midair, letting the thunderbolts keep smashing heavily on his body. On the ground, all the longbow people, including Chi-Chi, were standing in 99 square formations, staring at the dark clouds and thunderbolts in horror. The longbow people's heavenly tribulation was an eternal pain in their hearts. How many crimes had their ancestors committed against the heaven and earth that they were left with such a curse in their bloodline? Even the heavenly tribulation of a nascent divinity cultivator could not compare with such a thunder tribulation. If an ordinary longbow man were to encounter such a thunder tribulation, he or she would be killed on the spot. Therefore, although longbow people had a long lifespan and amazing innate divine abilities, very few of them would devote themselves to cultivation in order to make a breakthrough. It was because the moment they formed the Jin Dan was the moment they would die. The faster they cultivated, the faster their cultivation base improved, and the faster they would die. Any longbow man with a sane mind would not choose to cultivate, and would rather spend the rest of his life peacefully. Apart from the great divine magus of Longbow Kingdom, who had no choice but to cultivate in order to inherit the various mystic techniques and divine abilities of longbow people, ordinary longbow people, including the strongest warriors in their clan, would not deliberately improve their overall strength. As for the great divine magi of Longbow Country, a large number of their clansmen would be killed every 100 years. Therefore, the bloodline of the great divine magi of Longbow Country had always been sparse, because the other clansmen had all been killed when they were trying to break through the Jin Dan. On the other hand, Wu Qi was able to hover in the sky and block the thunder tribulation for them, which was powerful enough to kill any longbow man. This level of divine art, this level of divine power. Standing on a mountain not far away, Long Yuan and 100 longbow men, who had long been subdued by Wu Qi, roared out at the same time, "Great divine magus! This is the real great divine magus. He is the great divine shaman sent by our ancestors to save us. Only the real great divine magus can block the thunder tribulation for us, allowing us to form the Jin Dan." Raising both arms up high, Long Yuan leaped and roared, "By following His Excellency, great divine magus Wu Qi, we, the people of Longbow Kingdom, will have the hope of prosperity." Although the bodies of longbow men were huge, their brains did fit the description of muscle brains. Upon hearing Long Yuan's bewitchment, coupled with the frightening divine ability and power Wu Qi had displayed in front of them, all 9,900 longbow men dropped to their knees in front of Chi-Chi, shouting, "Great divine magus" at the top of their lungs. Bolts of thunder kept falling down, and large patches of golden runes appeared on the faces and arms of more and more longbow men. These golden runes formed into a complicated and exquisite circular formation, crazily absorbing the surrounding natural energies like a black hole. Suddenly, the bodies of these longbow men began to expand rapidly. From the original height of 100 feet, they had grown to about 1,000 feet. There were also those elite warriors who were born with great innate talent and strength. Their height suddenly rose to 3,000 feet, which was twice the height of Long Yuan now. For the people of Longbow Kingdom, there was a direct way to measure their overall strength. When none of them used their innate divine ability to transform their bodies, the one with the biggest body and the most developed muscles would definitely be the strongest warrior in the clan. Thunderbolts kept falling down from the sky. One after another, these longbow men, who had consumed the ancestral awakening and body-tempering soup, formed the Jin Dan, welcoming their Jin Dan thunder tribulation. These tough longbow men could form the Jin Dan just like ordinary people eating eggs. In just a few breaths of time, the Jin Dan had formed in their dantian. It took an ordinary human cultivator several hundred years of hard work to form a Jin Dan. The innate talent of these long bow men simply left one speechless. No wonder even the heaven disliked them, and their Jin Dan thunder tribulation was so violent. A blinding golden light shone from Wu Qi's body. 18 celestial fiend puppets had transformed into his appearance, hovering around him and absorbing the thunderbolts that kept falling down from the sky. Using a mystic technique, he extracted a tiny thread of pure yang energy from the gold core thunder tribulation, using it to temper his soul and form strands of nascent divinity. More than 1 million thunderbolts kept falling down from the Jin Dan thunder tribulation of nearly 10,000 longbow men. While Wu Qi's body was severely injured by the thunderbolts, his soul had shone with a dazzling golden light. In Wu Qi's spiritual ocean, a tiny fist-sized Wu Qi had formed. This tiny Wu Qi had a corporeal body, emitting a pure and gentle golden light. Obviously, it was a nascent divinity that had formed a corporeal body. Wu Qi was able to form such a nascent divinity at the early stage of Jin Dan. The various mystic techniques found in Scroll of Stealing had perfectly demonstrated the essence of stealing the heaven and earth. Of course, compared to a real nascent divinity cultivator, this tiny nascent divinity was slightly smaller. The nascent divinity of a nascent divinity cultivator was as tall as their innate nascent embryo, at least a few feet tall. However, this tiny nascent divinity of Wu Qi was only the size of a fist. However, this tiny nascent divinity of Wu Qi was formed with the pure yang thunder tribulation. It was so solid that it looked like it was cast from iron. Even some cultivators at the late stage of nascent divinity realm did not have a nascent divinity as strong as Wu Qi. When the last thunder tribulation came crashing down, Wu Qi suddenly threw his head back and let out a long roar. A tremendous sound wave towered up into the sky and shattered the clouds in the sky. A strong golden light kept bursting out from Wu Qi's body, transforming into streams of sword energy that swept across the surroundings. The small island underneath trembled violently, as it was shattered into pieces by Wu Qi's crazy outburst. Immediately, 10,000 longbow men of Jin Dan realm sprung into the sky and stood behind Wu Qi with Chi-Chi. Catfish Flood Dragon looked at these longbow men disapprovingly. She stared blankly at these huge fellows, trying to figure out which one was more tender and delicious, their muscles or those of a turtle. Meanwhile, Lord Xiansheng was staring at these 10,000 longbow men with shock and fear. A longbow man of Jin Dan realm could already fight against a nascent soul cultivator, and 10,000 longbow men whose overall strength was equivalent to that of an earth immortal of nascent soul realm. This benefactor of hers, this brother whom she had acknowledged, was indeed an unpredictable man. With such a brother, she could go anywhere in the world in the future. At the thought of this, Lord Xiansheng could not help but burst out laughing. He stretched out both arms toward Wu Qi and said, "Brother Wu Qi, this mystic technique of yours really has the ability to seize the fortune of the heaven and earth, and reverse the heavenly mystery. 10,000 longbow men of Jin Dan realm, what do you want me to say?" Wu Qi gave Lord Xiansheng a tight hug, then smiled and wagged his fingers. The black dragon's spirit ring and spirit breeding ring were glittering on his fingers. "Brother Xiansheng, in order to expand this spirit breeding ring, I need a few spirit items that can only be found in the deep sea," he said in a deep voice. Lord Xiansheng nodded and said, "Leave it to me. I'll go find the 3 strongest dragon kings of the great Eastern Ocean. As for these spirit items from the deep sea, they are just decorations. I'll get you enough materials, enough for you to store 1 million longbow men in the ring." Upon hearing that, Wu Qi was tempted. He laughed and said, "If that's the case, thank you, brother." Both men held hands and laughed, their hearts filled with a deep bond. Suddenly, a gust of chilly wind came approaching at high speed from the northwest. A ghost immortal of mid-stage nascent soul realm was flying toward them. The ghost immortal amidst the chilly wind had his hair disheveled, and his body was shrouded in ghostly flames. He was also an imperial guard secretly produced by Great Yan Dynasty, and was now assigned by Yan Dan to protect Princess Xianglu. Currently, Princess Xianglu had 16 ghost immortals of nascent soul realm as her personal guards. From afar, the ghost immortal roared at the top of his voice, Duke of Tianyun, Princess has lost her temper. She wants you to go back now. The emissary of Great Wei, Duke of Longyang, has come to visit, but Princess has stopped him at the city gate, forbidding him from entering. Ugh! Duke of Longyang has come to visit. Wu Qi shuddered abruptly. He grabbed Lord Xiancheng and Catfish Flood Dragon and cried out, "An unwelcome guest has come to visit. Quickly gather all your men, deploy a formation, and hide in the shallow water outside the city. When they hear my signal, rush out and kill them." After giving a few orders to Long Yuan and the other longbow men, asking them to follow closely behind him, Wu Qi took out the talismans given to him by Bai Xia and Qing Wu, exercised the acquired magnetic sword beam, and transformed into a stream of light as he sped towards the construction site of the new city which had been named Star-Picking City. The speed of the acquired magnetic sword beam was very fast, and it did not take him long to cover the distance of over 3,000 miles. Currently, the base of the city wall, about 10 feet tall, had been built around the city wall. When Wu Qi arrived at the western city gate, Princess Zhanglu was standing at the gate with a group of imperial guards, blocking Duke of Longyang, who had come alone. Smilingly, Duke of Longyang looked at Princess Zhanglu, who looked like she was about to fight a rooster, and kept smiling. Right when Wu Qi's sword beam descended, Princess Zhanglu grabbed Wu Qi's arm and cried out, "How could you let this demon, who is neither a man nor a woman, come to visit us?" While Wu Qi was grinning awkwardly, Duke of Longyang had already bowed to Wu Qi and said with a faint smile, "Duke of Tianyun, 7 days ago, Yan Li, the son of Crown Prince Qijuan of Yan Dynasty, was killed, and some of the disciples of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect have gone missing. I wonder if Duke of Tianyun knows about this." Wu Qi's eyes went wide in bewilderment. Yan Li was killed. Ugh, Zixian, do you have any impression of Yan Li? Princess Zhanglu twitched her red lips and said with a cold grin, "Who is Yan Li? What does it have to do with me?" Wu Qi turned to the startled Duke of Longyang, smiled and said, "Look, even Zixian doesn't care about Yan Li's life or death." "Who is Yan Li? What does his life or death have to do with me?" Duke of Longyang frowned in a troubled manner. He shook his head, breathed out a long sigh and said, "Then, Duke of Tianyun, do you know that a few immortal masters are about to open the door to the Tsang'eo immortal abode, and we can see the archway in front of the main entrance now?" Wu Qi was taken aback instantly. Tsang'eo immortal abode? The immortal ruins that Great Wei and Great Zhao were fighting over? Rolling his eyes, Wu Qi cried out anxiously, "An honorable guest is here. Quickly prepare some fragrant tea." Princess Zhanglu was so angry that she pinched Wu Qi's ribs, while Duke of Longyang smiled and followed Wu Qi into the city in an elegant manner. River, Luo, Zhong, Wen, Net. Chapter 291. Right at the center of Star-Picking City, where the future City Lord Mansion would be located, only a few luxurious tents were erected, surrounded by brocade curtains. On the north side was a tent, measuring over 200 feet in diameter. It was the daily residence of Princess Zhanglu, who oversaw the construction of Star-Picking City. Several hundred feet away, on the east side was another tent, where the 3 nascent divinity cultivators from White Cloud Immortal Sect stayed in Star-Picking City to help Wu Qi construct the defensive mechanism of the city. Now, all 3 peak stage nascent divinity cultivators had returned to their tents. If Duke of Longyang made any unusual move, what awaited him would definitely be a thunderous strike. Inside the tent, which was luxuriously decorated and looked just like a luxurious palace, Wu Qi was sitting on the main seat, while Princess Zhanglu was sitting on a soft cushion beside him, staring at Duke of Longyang with an unfriendly gaze. Out of the instinct of a woman, Princess Zhanglu would always be vigilant towards any living being that could pose a threat to her. Although Duke of Longyang was a man who was even more enchanting than a woman would pose a greater threat than a woman. Baizhuer and Baizuer brought tea to the table, then stood on both sides of Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu like 2 little demons with green faces and sharp fangs, staring at Duke of Longyang with the same unfriendly gaze. As the personal serving ladies of Princess Xianglu, Bai Zhuer and Bai Zuer could naturally empathize with a man who was even more enchanting than a woman, and shared the same hatred. After all, in a sense, they were also one of Wu Qi's future wives and concubines. A man like Duke of Longyang was indeed a threat to all of them. Nonchalantly, Duke of Longyang picked up the teacup and took a gentle sniff of the aroma. Shaking his head, he sighed and said, "Good tea, good water, and good charcoal fire. Too bad, I'm still lacking in the ability to control the temperature of the water. It was supposed to be an excellent tea, but now, it can only be considered as an ordinary tea. If Duke of Tianyun is interested, Longyang has a good tea ceremony." Princess Zhongli's eyes widened, and it looked like she was about to fly into a rage. Hastily, Wu Qi grabbed her thigh and gave it a hard press. Princess Zhongli's face blushed as her thigh was grabbed by Wu Qi. She bowed her head in a sweet voice, carefully rubbing the corner of her dress, and did not say another word. On the other hand, Bai Zhuer and Bai Zuer were so angry that their faces turned blue. They glared fiercely at Duke of Longyang and cursed in their hearts. Lord Longyang actually said that his tea brewing skills were not good enough. This tea was brewed by Bai Zhuer and Bai Zuer using all of their resources. Ignoring Lord Longyang, Wu Qi raised the teacup with one hand and took a sip of the fragrant tea. Indifferently, he said, "This is a wonderful tea." "Lord, you are being too picky." Lord Longyang cast a glance at Wu Qi, sighed softly and said, "It is not easy to live in the human realm. It's not easy for people to live in the first place, so why be so harsh on yourself? Throughout my life, be it clothes, food, or daily necessities, I have been very picky about everything, fearing that I would suffer even the slightest grievance." Sighing again, Lord Longyang turned to Princess Xianglu, smiled, and said, "For example, the rouge used on Princess's forehead, is it made from the juice of a tricolored rose that just bloomed on a spring night?" Princess Xianglu raised her head in astonishment and said, "You can even tell that?" Lord Longyang smiled charmingly, nodded, and said, "Tricolored rose has a beautiful color, which is a good product. However, because of its beautiful color, it is suitable for those royal ladies who are getting older and have a bit of amorous feelings. Princess Xianglu is a fairy, and she is in the prime of her youth. Therefore, tricolored rose products are not suitable for her. According to Lord Longyang's opinion, Princess should try the rouge powder made from purple lilac. It is elegant and beautiful, and it will not cover up Princess's natural beauty. At the same time, it can soften the skin, making it look like a layer of light smoke. It is the best product." Princess Xianglu blinked her eyes in astonishment. She was so shocked by Lord Longyang's opinion that she could not say a word. Wu Qi, on the other hand, felt his scalp tingle. This old devil was indeed a peerless evildoer. He pressed hard on Princess Zhongli's thigh and shouted in a deep voice, "My lord, did you come here just to discuss the rouge powder? What serious business do you have? Tell me quickly." Lord Longyang put down the teacup and covered the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. Then, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and said with a serious face, "First, Duke of Tianyun has killed my beloved concubine. What does Duke of Tianyun have to say about this?" Wu Qi glared at Lord Longyang and said with a sneer, "Cut the crap. What does your beloved concubine or chicken have to do with me? You have promised Lu Buwei and received some benefits from him. If you want to kill me, you must be prepared to be killed by me. If you don't accept it, I will kill you here today. So what? Let's see if Wei Wuji will fall out with me, Wu Qi, because of you." With a heavy palm strike, Wu Qi smashed the table in front of him into pieces. Then, he pulled out an immortal talisman glinting with a green gleam and stared fiercely at Lord Longyang. A gust of breeze came and lingered in the tent, as three old men clad in Taoist robes appeared out of thin air, standing in a straight line before Lord Longyang. Three powerful spiritual pressures blotted the sky and blotted the earth as they pressed towards Duke of Longyang. One of the old men sneered and said, "Wu Qi is the personal disciple of Patriarch. If anyone dares to mess with him, he will be making things difficult for White Cloud Immortal Sect. Immediately, Lord Longyang's serious face turned as charming as a spring flower. He gave the three old men a coquettish glance, covered the corner of his mouth and said with a faint smile, "Why do you take it so seriously? Longyang was just joking with Duke of Tianyun. How could I bear to harm such a wonderful man like Duke of Tianyun?" Looking at Lord Longyang's expression, the three nascent divinity experts from White Cloud Immortal Sect could not help but have goosebumps all over their bodies. They grinned and gave Lord Longyang a look, then spun, transformed into a breeze and disappeared. Since they had given Lord Longyang a warning, no matter how bold he was, he would not dare to attack Wu Qi in this place. They could not bear to look at a charming and enchanting demon like Lord Longyang, so they could only stay far away from him. With a wave of his hand, Wu Qi threw the long narrow table before him out of the tent. Then, Bai Zhu'er and Bai Zu'er brought another long narrow table and placed it before him. With a deep voice, Wu Qi cried out, "My lord, let's talk about something serious. Wu Qi is young and rash, and he can't understand your romantic tricks." Lord Longyang gave Wu Qi a deep look, then slowly straightened his back. A threatening heroic spirit burst out from his body, and in an instant, he transformed from an enchanting demon whose beauty could topple a state into a handsome hero who was brimming with heroic spirit, like a sharp blade that had just been unsheathed. At the same time, his voice had changed from the gentle and neutral tone to a voice that sounded like the knocking of a jade stone, a clear and sonorous voice that vaguely carried a murderous tone. He stared at Wu Qi and said, "All right, let's talk about something serious. The death of Yan Li has given some people in Great Yan Dynasty the opportunity to stir up trouble, saying that you are disrespectful to Great Yan, and have the intention of rebelling against Great Yan." Wu Qi shook his head, sighed and said, "It's still nonsense. My lord, please don't use these nonsense to frighten Wu Qi. Wu Qi is already engaged to Zi Xian, and he and Great Yan Imperial Clan are in the same boat. No one can jump out from the same boat. If Wu Qi were to plot against his father and grandfather after he was engaged to Zi Xian, would Wu Qi still be able to face the world if this news was spread out? His Majesty is not a fool, and neither is the Crown Prince. Since they have allowed Patriarch Jiang Yun to make the decision and let Zi Xian be engaged to me, why are they afraid that I will stand on my own? Rebellion? If I were a heaven immortal, there might be a possibility. But too bad, Wu Qi only has the cultivation base of Jin Dan now. Duke of Longyang opened his mouth, shook his head and laughed, "Duke of Tianyun, you are indeed a stubborn man. Well then, let's talk about something serious." He pondered for a brief moment, as if he had completely forgotten the two things he mentioned just now. With a solemn expression, he said, "His Majesty of Great Wei has the intention to form an alliance with Duke of Tianyun. In the future, as long as Duke of Tianyun can take care of Great Wei in White Cloud Immortal Sect, countless mighty soldiers and valiant generals of Great Wei can be used by Duke of Tianyun." Wu Qi pondered for a brief moment, then gently pressed his finger on Princess Zhang Li's thigh. Princess Zhang Lu rolled her eyes, sneered and said, "Mr. Longyang." Princess Zhang Lu emphasized on the word Mr., sneered and said, "Wu Qi is Zhang Li's husband, and that makes him a member of Great Yan's imperial clan. Great Yan has countless mighty soldiers and valiant generals as well, so why would we need the army of Great Wei?" Duke of Longyang said indifferently, "The army of Great Yan belongs to Yan Dan. On the other hand, the army of Great Wei can be personally deployed by Duke of Tianyun. The difference between the two is like the difference between heaven and earth. It is impossible for Duke of Tianyun to deploy the army of Great Yan to kill Lu Buwei, but the army of Great Wei can obey the order of Duke of Tianyun, and besiege the entire Lu clan." Duke of Longyang did not conceal anything, and his words were as naked as a newborn baby. Princess Zhang Lu narrowed her eyes and turned to look at Wu Qi. Wu Qi pondered for a brief moment, then nodded and said, "All right, Great Wei and Great Yan are now the disciples of White Cloud Immortal Sect, if possible." Casually, Wu Qi pointed at the entrance of the tent. Duke of Longyang smiled faintly, then clapped his hands lightly. Immediately, a large sheet of white mist and white lotus flowers burst out, enveloping the entire tent tightly. He chuckled and said in a low voice, "Now, we can discuss the conditions of both sides with peace of mind." Wu Qi leaned his body forward, while Duke of Longyang craned his neck and leaned over. Using the quickest speed, both men whispered for a while, then both of them reached out their hands at the same time and held each other's palms. Wu Qi smiled and said, "That's great, this is a very fair and reasonable condition." From now on, Wu Qi and his wife will advance and retreat together with Great Wei. Of course, the premise is that the immediate interests of both Great Yan and Great Wei will not be harmed. Duke of Longyang had regained his enchanting look. He held Wu Qi's palm tightly and said softly, "Duke of Tianyun has a very strong hand." Wu Qi's expression changed abruptly, turning almost blue. Princess Zhanglu glared at Duke of Longyang furiously, then forcefully slapped her palm onto the tightly held palms of both men, separating them. After that, right in front of Duke of Longyang, Princess Zhanglu took out a silk handkerchief, dipped it into the tea, and carefully wiped Wu Qi's palm. Wu Qi looked at Duke of Longyang helplessly and said, "Zi Xian is still young. Please don't take it to heart, Duke." Duke of Longyang breathed out a long sigh, then nodded his head indifferently and said, "Why would Longyang take it to heart? Duke of Tianyun, you have to be careful. It is the scholars of Yu Academy who are spreading the rumor that you are going to abandon Great Yan and establish your own independence in Ji City. Currently, 70% of all the civilian officials in Ji City regard you as their enemy. On top of that, the youngest young master of Zhao Kingdom, Zhao Ling, has known Wei Xiaoxiao for a long time. When he heard that Wei Xiaoxiao was killed by you, he has secretly contacted Lu Buwei, planning to assassinate you, Duke of Tianyun." Slowly, Duke of Longyang rose to his feet, retracted his divine ability, and said coolly, "I have no idea how many precious treasures are hidden in Sang-ao Immortal Abode. Duke of Tianyun, you have to go there and try your luck." After a brief moment of pondering, Duke of Longyang smiled and said, "Before I came here, I heard from a few immortal masters that the defensive mechanism at the front entrance of the Immortal Abode is very magical, and it will take at least 10 days to break through it. If Duke of Tianyun has the intention to go there, I suggest you make a plan as soon as possible." Duke of Longyang spun and walked towards the entrance of the tent. Waving his hands lightly behind his back, he praised softly, "I have to say, Duke of Tianyun has made a good move this time. By luring White Cloud Immortal Sect and Tranquil Vimla Sect into this place, you've destroyed all the plans of 6 dynasties, and in the end, Duke of Tianyun is the only one who can benefit from it. Over the past few days, that old fogey Lu Buwei has killed several dozens of his beloved concubines, and he hates Duke of Tianyun to the core." Upon hearing Duke of Longyang's words, Wu Qi just smiled proudly. "No matter how much you hate me, what can Lu Buwei do to me? Sang-ao Immortal Abode, I, Wu Qi, am coming. Yeah, thief, major, yes." Chapter 292. East of Star-Picking City, by the shore of the ocean, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu stood side by side, gazing at the vast ocean in the distance. Princess Zhanglu was obviously not in the right state of mind. She looked at Wu Qi with a sad face, pouted pitifully, and said, "Do I really have to go to that White Cloud planet? I have never seen those by Xia Immortal and Qing Wu Immortal. Wouldn't it be great if I could build a city here? Why should I take them as my master? Why should I go to White Cloud planet?" Wu Qi stroked Princess Zhongli's cheek and sighed softly, "The tree desires peace, but the wind will not subside. Without Zi Xian by my side, I can deal with those people easily." Turning his head and gazing deeply into Princess Zhongli's beautiful eyes, Wu Qi said with a smile, "Zi Xian, you are my most precious darling. How can I bear to let you hurt even a hair on your head? Go to White Cloud planet and work hard in your cultivation. When you reach the realm of Heaven Immortal, you will be able to protect me." Princess Zhanglu pinched her fingers unhappily and sighed softly, "Reach the realm of Heaven Immortal? That's so difficult." Wu Qi pinched her nose hard and said with a smile, "It is difficult for others, but it is very easy for Zi Xian." From the early stage of Jin Dan to the middle stage of Jin Dan, you have only spent a few months to completely stabilize your Jin Dan and form your solid core. Do you know that other Jin Dan stage cultivators would need hundreds of years of painstaking work to reach this step, but you only spent a few months? And you will at most become a heaven immortal in 100 years, right? Cultivating to become a heaven immortal in 100 years? Wu Qi was obviously fooling Princess Xianglu. Gently kissing Princess Xiangli's cheek, Wu Qi said with a smile, Zi Xian is the smartest girl in the world. A mere heaven immortal is nothing to me. Princess Xianglu pondered for a moment and frowned. Finally, she nodded and said, You're right. 100 years to become a celestial immortal. Zi Xuan will work hard. Suddenly, Princess Xianglu grabbed Wu Qi's arm and bit it hard. The bite tore his skin and flesh, causing blood to flow out. A deep bite mark was left on his arm. Wu Qi was in so much pain that he kept gasping, but his heart was twitching. According to Lu Xiaobai's understanding of women, a woman who likes to bite usually lacks a sense of security. Did such a proud Princess Xianglu not have any sense of security? With a sudden thought in his mind, Wu Qi hugged Princess Xianglu tightly and pressed his forehead against Princess Xiangli's. Suddenly, a tiny slit appeared between Wu Qi's brows. A stream of blood wrapped around the silver lotus, which had shrunk to the size of a sesame seed, rushed into Princess Xiangli's forehead in a blink of an eye. Wu Qi released a thread of his nascent divinity and gently touched Princess Xiangli's soul, then taught Princess Xianglu the mystic technique of forcibly forming a nascent divinity with the help of heavenly thunder he learned in Scroll of Stealing. After that, he mobilized nearly 70% of the innate energies in 10 innate Jin Dan and kept injecting them into Princess Xiangli's body. Suddenly, Princess Xiangli's blushing face turned as red as blood. An enormous amount of pure innate energies surged crazily into her body, forcefully smashing onto her dazzling 5-colored Jin Dan. Princess Xiangli's Jin Dan was like an evil ghost that had been starving for hundreds of thousands of years, and suddenly saw a bloody sheep. Hastily, it began to devour the innate energies of 5 elements that came knocking on its door. The 5-colored divine ray behind Princess Xiangli's back flickered rapidly, and suddenly expanded to the size of several acres. But not long after that, the 5-colored divine ray began to shrink rapidly, turning into 5 extremely fine threads of light and fusing into 5 strands of Princess Xiangli's long hair, hiding it so well that no one could see it. 70% of Wu Qi's innate energies of 5 elements, which was equivalent to the cultivation base of nearly 1,000 cultivators in Jin Dan, rushed into Princess Xiangli's Jin Dan, quickly pushing Princess Xiangli's Jin Dan to a magical transformation. First, it pushed Princess Xiangli's cultivation base skyrocketed to the peak of Jin Dan realm. As long as her understanding of the heavenly Tao was improved, she could fuse her soul with the Jin Dan according to the mystic technique of nascent soul formation, and she would be able to break her Dan and form her nascent soul smoothly. After that, Princess Xiangli's Jin Dan began to emit a 5-colored bright ray. The nature of her Jin Dan had been forcibly transformed into half innate and half acquired. From now on, Princess Xiangli's Jin Dan would absorb the energies of 5 elements from the outside world, and the Jin Dan she formed would carry half innate and half acquired attributes. No matter it was the power or the divine ability, it would be far superior to ordinary cultivators in Jin Dan realm. Together with the innate gold and silver lotus that Wu Qi had fused into her forehead, Princess Xianglu would have a life-saving treasure, and her safety would not be a problem anymore. Together with the protection of Bai Xia and Qing Wu, 2 female immortals, Princess Xianglu would be as safe as Mount Tai in White Cloud Planet. As for the divine flame of order on top of the silver lotus, it was split into half by Wu Qi's enormous and condensed power of nascent divinity. Then, he used the innate energies of 5 elements in his spiritual ocean and carefully confined it in the void. The destructive power of this thing was too strong. Without the restraint of the silver lotus, Wu Qi would have to figure out a way to control and utilize it. With the other half of the divine flame of order in her hand, Princess Xianglu would not have to worry about the risk of suffering from energy deviation when she was cultivating. He put his mouth next to Zhang Li's ear and told her about the origin of the silver lotus. After that, Wu Qi hugged Zhang Lu tightly, almost bringing her little head into his chest. With a low voice, he said, "Only you and I know the origin of this treasure. In the whole world, only you and I know it. Don't ever use it unless you are in a life-threatening situation. It is a good treasure, and it will make others jealous." Meanwhile, Princess Xianglu was exercising her cultivation technique to absorb the enormous energies that Wu Qi forcibly sent into her body. After inheriting her mother's innate divine ability, Princess Xianglu also possessed an innate talent that was close to the acquired divine energy of 5 elements. Now that she had absorbed the innate energies of 5 elements sent into her by Wu Qi, it was not strenuous for her to exercise her cultivation technique. Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, she kept nodding her head excitedly, then stood on tiptoe and kissed Wu Qi passionately. At the same time, she also transmitted all the mystic techniques she inherited from her bloodline to Wu Qi through her divine will. An enormous amount of strange and bizarre techniques kept rushing into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean. Some of them were recorded in the Scroll of Stealing, but some of them were so unimaginable that they were not even mentioned in the Scroll of Stealing. All kinds of poisonous goo, magispriests, curses, and spells of spirit speech were mystic techniques that were completely different from the orthodox qi refining cultivators. Among them, there were also many mystic techniques related to mountain ghosts and Yin deities. Wu Qi was so happy that he nearly laughed out loud. Rubbing Princess Zhang Li's little head, Wu Qi cried out in a deep voice, "All right, it's time for you to depart. According to that old monster Long Yang, in just a few days, Lu Buwei and his men will come and find trouble with me. It's a good opportunity for me to teach them a good lesson. Go to White Cloud Planet, focus on your cultivation, and don't make me worry, my little woman." "My little woman." Princess Xianglu raised her head stealthily and gave Wu Qi a quick glance. After that, she nodded her head vigorously, spun, and stepped onto a cloud and left at top speed. 16 nascent soul ghost immortals rode chilly winds and followed closely behind her. Together with Bai Zhu, and the other serving ladies and imperial guards, they followed closely behind Princess Xianglu. On the peak of a distant mountain, a few female cultivators clad in white clothes were waiting for Princess Xianglu. After Duke of Longyang left yesterday, Wu Qi immediately sent a message to Bai Xia and Qing Wu, asking them to send over some female disciples. Among them was a peak-stage nascent divinity female cultivator, and they would escort Princess Xianglu to White Cloud Planet, to the Spirit Cloud Peak where Bai Xia and Qing Wu usually cultivated in seclusion. Sangao immortal abode, coupled with the fact that Lu Buwei had instigated Zhao Xing's youngest son, Zhao Ling, to come and find trouble with Wu Qi, things would get really lively. If he did not send Princess Xianglu to an absolutely safe place, how could Wu Qi have the mood to deal with an old demon like Lu Buwei? Princess Xianglu was different from Lu Qingfeng. Even if Lu Qingfeng was attacked by someone and lost an arm or a leg, Wu Qi could avenge him later, and it would not be a big deal. But, if Princess Xianglu was harmed by someone with malicious intent, even if Wu Qi killed all his enemies, it would be useless. Therefore, Princess Xianglu had to leave this place. Fortunately, Princess Xianglu was deeply in love with Wu Qi. Although she was reluctant, she still obeyed his order and left this planet. As long as Princess Xianglu was safe, Wu Qi could finally do whatever he wanted. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi spun and waved his hand at a far distance. Lu Ziyuan and Hai Yuntian rushed over with an excited expression on their faces. Hai Yuntian, who was originally dressed in a short green outfit, had changed into a long green robe, and he now looked like a scholar. Wu Qi sized them up for a while, then nodded his head and said, "From today onwards, Brother Ziyuan will be the city lord of Star Picking City. You will be in charge of all the administrative affairs of Star Picking City. In the future, whether Star Picking City can be established as a nation or not will depend on Brother Ziyuan's capability." Lu Ziyuan quickly bowed deeply at Wu Qi, then raised both of his hands high up in the air to show his respect to Wu Qi, thanking Wu Qi for putting him in such an important position. As for his broken arm, Wu Qi had bought some spirit herbs from White Cloud Immortal Sect, and had it reattached to his arm. After comforting Lu Ziyuan, Wu Qi turned to Hai Yuntian and said, "Brother Yuntian, you and I are old friends, so let's skip the small talk. From today onwards, the star-picking pavilion under the name of Star-Picking City will be under your control. From today onwards, all the local products and precious treasures of Great Eastern Ocean will be sold and auctioned by all the merchants from different kingdoms." Grinning coldly, Wu Qi said proudly, "From today onwards, all the local products of Great Eastern Ocean will be jointly monopolized by Star-Picking City and Purple Leaf City. Those who are not convinced, ask them to find the new Dragon King, Lord Xiansheng and Catfish Dragon King, who live in the vicinity of several tens of millions of miles." Hai Yuntian thanked Wu Qi joyfully. With this promise from Wu Qi, the business of Star-Picking Pavilion in the future would be monopolized. Was there any business under the heaven that could bring more profit than monopolizing? As a comprador of Ji City for several dozens of years, Hai Yuntian could not wait to show off his skills. After dismissing both men, Wu Qi had finally settled all the affairs in Star-Picking City. Right after he let out a few long laughs, he saw a dark cloud rolling towards him from the horizon. Lord Xiansheng brought a large group of prawn soldiers and crab generals and arrived on a cloud. While they were still tens of miles away, Lord Xiansheng could not wait any longer and let out a loud laugh. "My good brother, I've not let you down. All the materials you need to expand the spirit breeding ring, I've brought you 100 times the amount. Sigh, it's not really a spiritual item. This spirit-storing jade is used as a brick in the Dragon King's residences of the old Dragon Kings." Wu Qi was rendered speechless. The most important function of the spirit breeding ring was that it could freely absorb natural energies from the outside world, providing them to the living beings stored in the ring. The spirit-storing jade was one of the most important materials for the spirit breeding ring. In Great Yan Dynasty, a fist-sized spirit-storing jade was worth tens of thousands of gold coins. But in those Dragon King's mansions in Great Eastern Ocean, they were actually used as bricks? Shaking his head, Wu Qi felt that he had to pay a visit to those Dragon King's mansions in a few days. 7 days later, on the shore of East Ocean, a beam of white light swept across the sky. Amidst the white light, 10,000 tall and burly longbow men vanished without a trace. Wu Qi caressed the spirit breeding ring on his finger, which had expanded by more than 1,000 times. Once again, he threw his head back and let out a loud laugh. Who under the heaven could bring an army of 10,000 men with him? Lu Buwei, Zhao Ling, or anyone else, I, Wu Qi, will be waiting for you. Chapter 293. After sending off Princess Xianglu and settling all the affairs in Star-Picking City, Wu Qi had successfully expanded the spirit breeding ring, allowing him to carry 10,000 longbow men with him. Leisurely and alone, Wu Qi traveled from Star-Picking City through a teleportation formation and returned to Meng Fortress. After that, he traveled through a teleportation formation and arrived at the border between Great Wei and Great Zhao, a lofty mountain with a scale no smaller than Meng Mountains, but even more precipitous and majestic, He Mountain. At the heart of He Mountain was a vast lake, measuring 1,000 miles in circumference. It was a great lake with a diameter of 1,000 miles, but its depth was over 27,000 miles. It was like a deep well, and not even the heaven and earth could create such an unreasonable existence. It could only be a man-made miracle. At a depth of 27,000 miles, the water pressure in the deep water had reached an unimaginable level. Only an earth immortal with a cultivation base of peak stage nascent soul realm or above, who was supported by an excellent defensive magical treasure and exerted all his strength, could walk and breathe freely like a mortal. However, if one wanted to fight, compete with magical techniques, or assassinate each other with flying swords, only cultivators of nascent divinity realm would have the strength to spare. At the deepest part of the lake, the water here was no longer water, but acquired water essence, which was as sticky as glue, pitch black like ink, and several hundred times heavier than mercury. In the outside world, this kind of Gué water essence was a rare natural treasure, an excellent material for crafting magical treasures. However, in the depths of this nameless lake, there was a large piece of it that had a circumference of 1,000 miles and a thickness of over 10 miles. Right in the center of the lake, a silver speck of light, 100 miles in circumference, was vaguely visible. It was a silver beam that shot straight out from the bottom of the lake, right before the entrance of Tsang-Ao immortal abode. Originally, it was only several tens of feet in circumference, but when it reached the surface of the lake, it had expanded to 100 miles. Following the silver speck of light, 100 miles in circumference, 100 miles in circumference, was the entrance of Tsang-Ao immortal abode. Currently, on a grassland that measured several hundred acres in circumference next to the lake, the flags of the emperors of 6 dynasties were fluttering above the city. Above the imperial flags of 6 dynasties were a plain white flag and a plain green lotus flag, representing White Cloud Immortal Sect and Tranquil Vimla Sect. These 2 flags were actually top-grade magical treasures as well, but they did not have any defensive or offensive power. The only function they had was to release a strong light and auspicious cloud, which allowed these 2 flags to be clearly visible from tens of thousands of miles away. Even an ordinary mortal could clearly see these 2 flags from tens of thousands of miles away. This was the grandeur that an immortal sect should have. Standing above the teleportation array in the earthen city, Wu Qi, who was enjoying the scenery around him, did not think much of it. Wu Qi was clearly an insignificant figure in the 6 nations. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be too many people paying attention to him. However, right after he walked out from the teleportation array, he was immediately greeted by numerous hostile gazes. Some of them even did not conceal the killing intent in their eyes. Judging from the current situation, there were at least 1,000 people in the earthen city who wished they could crush him into pieces. It was especially true for Xiang Ta and Xiang Zhuang, the 2 military officers of Xiang clan, who had just brought a team of elite soldiers and drove a bronze chariot into the city, with piles and piles of bloody prey placed in the chariot. When they saw Wu Qi, their eyes immediately turned red. Both men exchanged a glance, and under the gloating gazes of countless people around them, they suddenly turned the chariot around and sped towards Wu Qi. Wu Qi looked coldly at Xiang Ta and Xiang Zhuang, who were driving the chariot towards him. Suddenly, he fished out an immortal talisman from Black Dragon's spirit ring, glinting brightly with a green gleam, and lightly flicked one of its corners with his finger. An enormous immortal pressure burst out from the surface of the immortal talisman, causing the rhino that was pulling the chariot to stop its wild charge, then knelt on the ground timidly. No matter how exasperatedly Xiang Zhuang raised the whip and lashed at the rhino refused to rise to its feet. Feeling the pain, the rhino, who had formed his demon core, turned his head angrily and roared at Xiang Zhuang, "General Xiang Zhuang, it is an agreement signed between our ancestors and the Emperor of Great Chu that our people are helping Great Chu in the war. We are not going to die in vain. That little fellow has an immortal talisman in his hand, a talisman crafted by a heaven immortal. If you want to die, go ahead. For the sake of our many years of cooperation, I'll help you collect your dead bodies later." Xiang Ta and Xiang Zhuang's faces turned blue with anger. Suddenly, some people near and far let out mocking laughter together. Amidst so many people who were laughing at them, the fat Huang Xia, who was sitting on a deck chair on the wall and enjoying Li Yuan's gentle massage, laughed even louder and harsher. Slapping his own belly, he could not help but burst out laughing and said, "Generals, why aren't you fighting anymore? Sigh, this monarch thought that you would be willing to sacrifice your lives to avenge the humiliation of your nominal lord and mistress." Xiang Ta's muscles bulged, but he could still maintain his consciousness. On the other side, Xiang Zhuang roared furiously and drew his sword, thrusting it towards Wu Qi's chest while leaving a blood-red trail in the air. Holding the sword with his right hand, Xiang Zhuang clenched his left hand into a fist and punched forcefully towards Wu Qi's forehead. The punch was piercingly cold, and a large sheet of red energy exploded in the air. It was obvious that he was going to smash Wu Qi's head with this punch. A cold gleam flashed in Wu Qi's eyes. Just as he was about to activate the immortal talisman and kill Xiang Zhuang on the spot, a beam of white light suddenly came shooting at him. A jarring sound of metal clashing rang out, as the sword in Xiang Zhuang's right hand was shattered into pieces. Suddenly, a hole was pierced through his armor, and a white beam as thick as a fist appeared on his body, leaving a huge hole on his body. Xiang Zhuang howled miserably as blood sprayed out from his body and he was knocked flying backward. The flesh and blood around the wound on his chest were wriggling rapidly, healing the wound at an incredible speed. However, a wisp of extremely sharp Tai Bai Qi of life was hiding near his wound, preventing it from healing. Bathed in blood, Xiang Zhuang fell to the ground and slid back for several thousand feet, knocking his head onto a bronze flagpole. Only then did he manage to stabilize himself. The white beam dissipated, and Jing Ku revealed himself from within. He stared coldly at Xiang Ta, who had pulled out his sword, and said coolly, "Great Chu and Great Yan are allies. If you do not wish to stir up a conflict between the two dynasties, I suggest you exercise restraint. Since the emperors of both dynasties are disciples of White Cloud Immortal Sect, by suddenly attacking Duke of Tianyun, who is also a disciple of White Cloud Immortal Sect, is that considered as betraying the sect and deceiving the master? Are you trying to make His Majesty Chu Ping fulfill the oath he made when he joined White Cloud Immortal Sect and have his soul destroyed?" Raging with rage, Xiang Zhuang struggled to his feet, and was about to cooperate with Xiang Ta and continue their assault. But, they suddenly heard Jing Ku's rebuke. Both men exchanged a glance, and cold sweat suddenly broke out from their foreheads. Suddenly, a fat figure flashed across from the side. It was Huang Xie, the fat man, who was standing in front of Wu Qi. Smiling, he shouted at Xiang Ta and Xiang Zhuang, "General Jing Ku is right. Duke of Tianyun is the direct disciple of Patriarch Jiang Yun. Are you trying to put His Majesty in an unjust position by attacking him? Are you trying to make His Majesty break the oath and die?" The sudden appearance of Huang Xie had left Xiang Ta and Xiang Zhuang with no other way to deal with him. Both men gave a muffled snort, then Xiang Ta carried the severely wounded Xiang Zhuang and went to find a place to heal his wounds. Smiling, Huang Xie nodded at Wu Qi, then turned to look at Li Yuan, who was standing on top of the city wall. After that, he spun and teleported next to her, then sat down heavily on the deck chair. Wu Qi also turned to give Li Yuan a deep look, as an almost imperceptible sneer emerged in his eyes. "Perhaps, no one could recognize you after you changed your appearance, but how could Wu Qi not recognize the scent on your body? Naturally, a qualified thief would not let go of even the slightest scent." Jing Ku greeted Wu Qi, then said in a low voice, "She is from Great Chu. The identity of this woman is very complicated. Do not provoke her unless necessary. I think she is the younger sister of Li Yuan, the current Prime Minister of Great Chu, the King of Chunshen, Huang Xie's." Twitching his lips, Jing Ku used a very common term to describe Li Yuan, old mistress. Wu Qi smiled, shook his head, and followed Jing Ku into the assembly hall located right in the center of the city. When Wu Qi walked into the Great Council Hall, all the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties turned to look at him with surprise. After that, a few of them who had a grudge against Wu Qi even scolded him. How could a mere Duke of Tianyun of Great Yan dynasty, who did not have any actual power in the imperial court, have the qualification to visit such an important place? How could he have the qualification to attend the meeting of the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties? Wu Qi could sense the hostility in the eyes of these people. He smiled sheepishly, walked slowly next to Patriarch Jiang Yun, kowtowed, and said, "Master, with the help of 3 senior brothers, everything in Star-Picking City has gone smoothly. I have handed over all the tasks in my hands, and I can now accompany Master and listen to your teachings." Patriarch Jiang Yun nodded his head gladly, then waved his hand and said, "Rise, my disciple. As your cultivation base is still weak, you should consult me more often in the future. If there is anything you don't understand, you can always come to me and ask me. For the next few days, you can always stay by my side." Patriarch Jiang Yun snorted lightly, then suddenly unleashed an enormous immortal pressure. Immediately, all the emperors and ministers in the hall felt a chill run down their spines. Only then did they suddenly remember that although Wu Qi was a minister of Great Yan, he was now the trusted disciple of White Cloud Immortal Sect's patriarch. The degree of favor he received was far greater than any of them. The hostile gazes quickly disappeared. With a faint smile on his face, Wu Qi strode to the back of Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other heaven immortals, then stood aside. Intentionally or unintentionally, he turned to look at Lu Buwei, but the latter just kept looking at Wu Qi with a smile on his face, as if nothing was amiss. In fact, there was even a hint of benevolence in the way Lu Buwei looked at Wu Qi, as if he was a benevolent grandfather looking at his obedient grandson. A chill ran down Wu Qi's spine. Sure enough, this old traitor was not easy to deal with. If it were someone who was a little more reckless, he would have been fooled by him. After giving Lu Buwei a glance, Wu Qi finally turned to look at the group of people who were kneeling in the center of the hall, their bodies shackled by runes and unable to move. Their faces looked extremely old, so old that they were merely skin and bones, and when they breathed, it seemed like they would stop breathing at any time. However, the aura of their souls was extremely powerful. Vaguely, there were various beast souls drifting behind their backs. Among these beast souls, the strongest one was a white horse with a pair of wings on its back. Vaguely, it showed signs of breaking through peak stage nascent soul realm. A peak stage nascent divinity cultivator from Tranquil Vimla sect cupped his fist and bowed to the 6 heaven immortals, then said, "Ancestral masters, here are 135 men. They are the clan leaders and oracles of the 72 strongest barbarian clans in He Mountain and Meng Mountain. Ancestral masters, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them." A bright gleam flickered in Wu Qi's eyes as he gave these old men a surprised look. Were they the leaders of all the strongest barbarian clans in He Mountain and Meng Mountain? Chapter 294. Inside the Grand Hall, over 100 barbarian leaders were seen sitting cross-legged on the ground, their bodies glinting brightly and covered with all kinds of restrictive talismans. Their cultivation base was completely sealed, and they could not activate even a tiny bit of their aura. However, their beast souls were extremely lively, as they revealed their true forms behind their backs, wriggling and struggling silently as if they had gone mad. They threw their heads back and roared into the sky, emanating tremendous soul energy waves that made Wu Qi feel suffocated. Wu Qi had witnessed the unique beast warrior technique of Great Yan Dynasty's scouting office. With the power of beast souls, an ordinary Hotian warrior could unleash the strength equivalent to a low-tier Xiantian cultivator. However, the cultivation of beast warriors was extremely harsh and difficult. Just like what Qin Qingshui had done, he had to consume countless spirit pills and rare natural treasures to push his nether python to the nascent soul realm. As for these barbarian leaders, who had a cultivation base equivalent to an early-stage nascent divinity cultivator, only God knew how many years they had been cultivating and how many resources they had consumed. Furthermore, the life force in these barbarian leaders' fleshly bodies was nearly depleted, and their flame of life could be extinguished at any time. However, their souls were incredibly strong. When their souls were combined with their beast souls, they were a few times stronger than ordinary cultivators with the same cultivation base. Their souls were full of life force, and they kept emanating tremendous soul energy waves, making it impossible for ordinary people to stand in front of them. Wu Qi stared at these barbarian leaders in surprise, pondering the uniqueness of their beast soul cultivation technique. Without a doubt, the beast warrior cultivation technique of scouting office was robbed from the barbarians. Just like all the other cultivation techniques, they were all robbed from the barbarians. However, Wu Qi had a feeling that there was something very mysterious and unusual about this beast soul cultivation technique, as if the meaning hidden in it was far more than what he had seen today. The divine sense of a heaven immortal was extremely powerful, and its power was boundless. Although Wu Qi was standing behind Patriarch Jiang Yun, he could still see the surprised and thoughtful expression on Wu Qi's face. Patriarch Jiang Yun didn't move his lips, but his voice, which was as thin as a gossamer, had already echoed in Wu Qi's mind. This is the most orthodox cultivation technique of the human race when the ancient human emperors ruled the world. I didn't expect to find some fragments of it in this place. In just one breath of time, Patriarch Jiang Yun had explained to Wu Qi what the so-called beast warrior technique was. The so-called beast warrior was the most orthodox and fundamental cultivation method of the human race during the era of the ancient human sovereign. The human race was born from the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. They were born with great luck and were destined to become the masters of heaven and earth, the spirits of all living beings. As for the newly born human race, they were weak and powerless. They did not have a good way to resist the various dangers of the natural world. Therefore, there were great heroes among the human race who used their great strength to subdue powerful beasts, subduing their souls and merging them with their own human souls. The human race was born with 3 souls and 7 spirits that corresponded to the laws of heaven and earth. Thus, they were born with the ability to understand the secrets of heaven, investigate the geography, and were born with intelligence. As for the beasts, they were born with either 1 soul and 1 spirit, 1 soul and 2 spirits, or 2 souls and 2 spirits. In short, their souls were incomplete. Apart from some rare divine beasts that existed during the creation of the world, such as the legendary Qilin or Phoenix, all the other beasts would always have incomplete souls. With incomplete souls, they would be born ignorant. Even if they were fated to be immortals and learned the Tao of cultivation, they would have to face many difficulties and obstacles, making it difficult for them to transcend. On the other hand, these beasts would give up their fleshly bodies and merge their powerful beast souls with the human souls. With that, they would be able to absorb the essence of the 3 souls and 7 spirits from the human souls, completing their souls and obtaining endless benefits. The human race monopolized the fortune of heaven and earth. Any beast that could merge with the soul of a human warrior and lend its powerful innate power to the human warrior, protecting the human race from being harmed by the natural world, would be rewarded with a great amount of virtues. With the virtues, when the human warrior's lifespan came to an end, his beast soul would enter the cycle of transmigration. With the protection of the virtues, he would be able to transcend his beast body and reincarnate into a human, or into the body of a high-level immortal beast or divine beast. Especially with the protection of the virtues, they could retain part of the memories of their previous lives, which made it extremely easy for them to cultivate in their next lives. Therefore, it was a mutually beneficial thing for both sides. In the ancient times, most human warriors had merged with the beast souls, which allowed them to unleash a formidable power that could even fight against the ancient heavenly gods. In the ancient times, the strongest human warriors could even merge with the beast souls of the legendary descendants of the 4 holy beasts, which gave them a tremendous power that could destroy the heaven and earth. Yen Bugue and the others, who had only merged with the wind-breaking wolf, which was a demon beast, could only unleash the power of Xiantian realm. Compared to the ancestors of the human race, they were extremely weak. These barbarians were not barbarians, but the descendants of the most orthodox lineage of the human race. All kinds of cultivation techniques they mastered were the strange abilities left behind by the ancient ancestors of the human race. Wu Qi took a deep look at these barbarian leaders, who were so old that they could not be described with words. He could not help but shake his head. After explaining the origin of these beast souls to Wu Qi, Patriarch Jiang Yun said, "Listen up, all of you. We come with no evil intentions. We just want to find out the origin of this planet." The barbarian leaders fell into a moment of silence. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the oldest barbarian, an old man, whose body was densely covered with countless embroidery patterns and holding a pitch-black bone staff, slowly rose to his feet. Coldly, he glanced at the 6 heaven immortals sitting high up in the hall, then suddenly laughed coldly and said, "You came straight into our clan, killed many of our people, and abducted us here without any evil intentions? If you had any evil intentions, you would have wiped out all of us, wouldn't you?" "That is just a misunderstanding," said Patriarch Jiang Yun coolly. "It was your people who attacked my disciples first." The old barbarian pondered for a brief moment, then slowly nodded and said, "My children are always harassed by these people outside the mountain. Therefore, when they see outsiders, they attack them with all their strength. We can't blame them for that." Glancing around, the old man said in a cold voice, "It is you, it is these people. Ask yourselves, how many young girls from different clans have you abducted from the forest all these years?" The emperors of the 6 dynasties looked at each other, but none of them said a word. Only the heavens knew the exact number. Great Yen had issued the barbarian killing order, and every year, countless barbarians were killed by the warriors of Great Yen. Apart from Great Chu, the situation in all the other dynasties was almost the same. The young barbarians were always the targets of slaughter, while the pretty and wild barbarian girls were the favorite collection of the rich and powerful. Over the years, only the heavens knew how many barbarian girls had been abducted from the forest. Didn't Yen Qijuan marry a barbarian holy maiden, and even gave birth to Princess Zhangla with her? Even a holy maiden had been abducted, let alone ordinary people. The old barbarian snorted coldly, then looked at Patriarch Jiang Yun and said in a deep voice, "Look, immortals, you can't blame us for this." Patriarch Jiang Yun was not moved by the old man's words. "You can't blame my disciples," he said coolly. "You were the one who attacked first, and that was courting death. Answer my question now, or else, your entire clan will be wiped out." An enormous immortal pressure was unleashed without reservation. The frightening immortal pressure of Patriarch Jiang Yun, which was infinitely close to 35th tier heaven immortal, immediately made all the barbarian leaders kneel on the ground, unable to move. The old barbarian knelt on the ground, drenched in sweat. Suddenly, his shriveled body began to swell, and his muscles began to bulge. Patriarch Jiang Yun sneered and said, "Are you still trying to resist? Do you really want your clan to be wiped out? Answer my question, and you can go back safely. From now on, the people of these dynasties will not disturb your peace, but you are not allowed to disturb the people outside the mountain." Upon hearing Patriarch Jiang Yun's words, the old barbarian's body quickly shriveled up again. He pondered for a brief moment, then nodded and said, "Our lifespan is not long, and we are not as long as the legendary leaders of the various clans in the ancient times. We can live up to 300 years at most, and that is already a blessing from the heaven. Therefore, many things are passed down by word of mouth from generation to generation, and when it comes to us, many of the records are incomplete." Lao Ai suddenly said with a cold grin, "Why don't you record them in the ancient books and keep them well?" Patriarch Jiang Yun gave Lao Ai a look, nodded slowly, and agreed with Lao Ai's question. The old barbarian rolled his eyes, sneered, and said, "You have been wantonly plundering all kinds of ancient books and records left behind by our ancestors. Do you think we would dare to record those precious ancient stories? The most important things are the origin of our clans, and they are all recorded in our hearts. In the future, we will have to rely on these records to reunite with our ancestors. If they are robbed by you, what should we do?" His words rendered Lao Ai speechless. He twitched his lips and did not say another word. In the great hall, the old barbarian patriarch began to narrate slowly. A very long time ago, about 2 great apocalypses ago, this planet was called Myriad Immortals Planet, and it was the most famous planet in Minor Heavenly Circle realm where cultivators gathered. When the great apocalypse began, all the clans went to war, and the heaven and earth turned upside down. First, it was the war between the armies of the human race and the cultivators, then the armies of fiendish devils broke through the void and came to fight against the cultivators and the human race. The war lasted for several thousand years, and countless mighty existences were killed or wounded. Later on, the leaders of the armies of the human race were either killed or wounded, and the armies that followed them scattered into the mountains. Later on, alliances of various clans were formed. As a result, the descendants of the cultivators were nearly wiped out, and only a small number of cultivator clans survived. On the other hand, the fiendish devils suffered a great loss. Apart from some of the weakest fiendish devils, all the stronger fiendish devils had disappeared. The war between the 3 parties was so chaotic that the sky was shaking and the earth was cracking. No one knew which party was the one who flew into a rage out of humiliation, and decided to simply cast a restrictive spell, shattering millions of planets in the vicinity of Myriad Immortals Planet, turning it into a desolate land where no one could enter or leave. Patriarch Jiang Yun nodded and said, "So, the origin of the flaming nether ocean can be traced back to 2 great apocalypses ago." When Patriarch Jiang Yun said that, all 6 heaven immortals could not restrain their excitement. Even Bai Xia, who was the most reserved among them, had a faint smile on her face, and a bright gleam could be seen flickering in her eyes. It was no wonder that the descendants of the Longbow people and Feather Men, who had gone extinct in Minor Heavenly Circle realm, could still be found on this planet. This kind of tribulation would often cause the world's origin energy on the surface of a planet to become extremely chaotic. For a very long time in the future, there would not be any powerful cultivators appearing on this planet. Patriarch Jiang Yun counted with his fingers and said, "I see." About 100,000 years ago, this myriad immortals planet had barely recovered, and that was the reason why nascent divinity cultivators could appear here. Before that, the strongest cultivator was merely a nascent soul cultivator. However, the lifespan of nascent soul cultivators is limited. They could not even ascend to the immortal realm. Wu Qi quickly took a step forward and said, Weining Dragon King of Longyuan River once had 2 flood dragons who ascended to the immortal realm. Patriarch Jiang Yun shook his head, smiled faintly and said, that was something that happened in the last 100,000 years. It was something that happened 2 great apocalypses ago. I'm afraid those 2 flood dragons only know that this is Myriad Immortals planet, and what happened in those years. However, I'm afraid even the current immortal monarchs of Minor Heavenly Circle realm have no idea about the exact location of Myriad Immortals planet. As a matter of fact, this priceless planet now belongs to White Cloud Immortals sect and Tranquil Vimla sect. At this point, Daoist Qing Exan laughed out loud and said, this is a priceless planet left behind 2 great apocalypses. During the last great apocalypse, it was said that the descendants of Minor Heavenly Circle Immortal Monarch were wiped out by someone, and all their scriptures were completely destroyed. Now, no one knows the exact location of Myriad Immortals planet. Therefore, this priceless planet really belongs to us now. Unable to restrain the excitement in their hearts, all 6 heaven immortals roared with laughter. Now that they knew the origin of this priceless planet, they could develop it to their heart's content, and make their sex grow stronger as much as they wanted. Patriarch Jiang Yun sprung to his feet excitedly and said, Good, good. This is indeed a great thing. Everyone, follow me to open the Tsang Ao immortal abode. Cultivators from 2 great immortal sects stepped forward and released the barbarian leaders as promised. At the moment, these leaders were of no use to them. With the 6 heaven immortals leading the way, all the people in the grand hall responded to Chi-Chi's call and rose to their feet. Wu Qi followed closely behind the 6 heaven immortals and walked out of the grand hall. The company stepped onto clouds and flew straight towards the silver speck in the center of the lake. Chapter 295. The army stepped onto clouds and flew towards the Tsang Ao immortal abode in a mighty formation. An abode left behind by an immortal who had fallen before the 2 great apocalypses made the 6 heaven immortals, including Patriarch Jiang Yun, extremely excited. In the end, 36th tier heaven immortals were just the weakest existences in the cultivation system of immortals. In the cultivation system of immortals, Minor Heavenly Circle realm could only serve as a stepping stone. It was not hard to imagine how attractive an ancient immortal abode was to Patriarch Jiang Yun and his companions. If not for the fact that they were suspicious of the origin of Myriad Immortals planet and had ordered their disciples to capture barbarian leaders to gather information, perhaps these 6 heaven immortals would have long broken the last restrictive spell of Tsang Ao immortal abode with violence, rushing into the abode and looting everything. Wu Qi followed closely behind Patriarch Jiang Yun, stealthily glancing around at the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties, who had a calm expression on their faces. A priceless planet left behind by a great war before the 2 great apocalypses. And it was such a coincidence that millions of planets in the vicinity of this priceless planet were shattered, leaving behind a flaming nether ocean that even gold immortals could not enter and exit freely. And the location of this priceless planet was right in the middle of the flaming nether ocean, and no one had discovered it after so many years. During the Great War between the 3 dynasties, all 3 dynasties had their descendants left behind. It was not hard to imagine that the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties were the descendants of those cultivators. Because of the fluctuation of natural energies, the descendants of these cultivators could hardly achieve any success in their cultivation base. The strongest among them could cultivate to the realm of nascent soul, but they could only live for several thousand years before they fell one after another. Over 10 billion years had passed since the two great apocalypses, and after several tens of thousands of generations, it was only natural that the descendants of these cultivators had forgotten the great achievements of their ancestors. It was not until 100,000 years ago that the natural energies in this place calmed down. Therefore, the descendants of these cultivators rose in the wilderness, gradually growing stronger and prosperous. Finally, over 2,000 years ago, under the command of the emperors of the six dynasties, Yen Dan, the emperors of the six dynasties, defeated the alliance of barbarian tribes in one fell swoop, and gradually developed to the present day, forming the six dynasties. Wu Qi sighed in his mind. The story was perfectly woven, and at least, Wu Qi could not find any loopholes. From the looks of it, Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others were convinced of this statement, and there was no doubt in their hearts. If it weren't for the fact that Wu Qi and Yen Dan came from the same place and were familiar with the names of these people, he would have been fooled. How did they get here? What are they doing here? Wu Qi frowned and instinctively took a step closer to Patriarch Jiang Yun. Patriarch Jiang Yun keenly sensed Wu Qi's little movement. He turned to Wu Qi, nodded amiably, and said with a smile, "Don't be afraid, my good disciple. Although this is a cave abode of an ancient immortal, after so many years of changes in the underground energy veins, all the defensive mechanisms in this cave abode are broken and incomplete. So, there is not much danger in here. Hee, 2 eons. This age is really too ancient." Taking advantage of the situation, Wu Qi said, "Master, please be extra careful. After all, this is a cave abode left behind by an ancient immortal. Those defensive mechanisms are dead, and will be worn away by the passage of time. But, if there is a living being in the cave abode, we have to be extra careful." The expressions of Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other heaven immortals fell instantly, while Daoist Qing Shen cried out in horror, "What martial nephew Wu Qi said is absolutely right. If there is a living being left in that cave abode, what is its cultivation base? Fellow Taoists, we have to be extra careful." Behind him, the emperors and ministers of six dynasties, and the elite disciples of two immortal sects, all had a shocked look on their faces. Patriarch Jiang Yun gave Wu Qi a praising look again, then nodded and said, "My good disciple, you are more cautious than me." He glared fiercely at all the disciples of White Cloud Immortal Sect and snapped, "How old are you? Why are you not as meticulous as a new disciple?" Wu Qi bowed his head, smiled, and did not say a word. How could this be considered as meticulous? Clearly, it was because he had been a thief in underhand sect for too long, and he knew that some freakishly rich people like to use living beings to guard all kinds of precious treasures in their safety deposit boxes. It was not the first or second time that he had encountered something like pulling out a handful of venomous snakes from a safety deposit box. As for the scroll of stealing, there were many things that Wu Qi should pay attention to, one of which was the possibility of being guarded by living beings in the immortal abode. The shadowy figure who inherited Wu Qi's scroll of stealing had once encountered an ancient divine beast, a three-headed black qilin, in the treasure vault of an almighty expert, and was chased by that beast for 3 years without being able to escape. When Patriarch Jiang Yun praised Wu Qi, all the disciples of White Cloud Immortal Sect just bowed and listened to him. On the other hand, the faces of some people from Great Yen, Great Chu, and Great Wei turned slightly unsightly. They stared coldly at Wu Qi's body. They had some opinions about Wu Qi, who had robbed them of their glory. Wu Qi could sense these hostile gazes, but he did not mind them at all. Before 1 or 2 heaven immortals appeared among the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties, Wu Qi had no fear. Even if heaven immortals were to appear, they had to be able to transcend their heavenly tribulations. Wu Qi had no interest in helping these people transcend their heavenly tribulations, but when some people whom he did not like were transcending their heavenly tribulations, Wu Qi was very interested in giving them some troubles. In the scroll of stealing, there were all kinds of mystic techniques that could create troubles. For example, when one was at the most critical moment of transcending one's heavenly tribulation, one could be sprinkled with a large amount of drunken dragon incense. With that, one would not even know how one died. Thinking of this, Wu Qi could not help but turn his head and grinned at those people. Sure enough, he saw Lu Buwei, Xiang Yu, and a few others slowly turn their heads and look to the side. The cloud moved at a high speed, and very soon, the company arrived above the silver spot in the middle of the lake. At the order of Patriarch Jiang Yun and Qing Xian, the company descended onto the cloud. Using an incantation gesture, Patriarch Jiang Yun parted the lake water, then stepped on the cloud and flew down through the water channel. Once they started moving, they could immediately see the differences in this large group of people. Naturally, the 6 heaven immortals flew at the front, while Wu Qi, who was favored by the 3 patriarchs of White Cloud Immortal Sect, followed closely behind them. Behind the 6 heaven immortals were the disciples of 2 immortal sects, who lined up neatly and flew in a strict formation. According to their cultivation base, specialties, and the characteristics of their magical treasures, they formed 2 formations that could both attack and defend as they flew down. Vaguely, an eerie aura could be sensed from them. As for the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties, they did not form a formation like the disciples of the immortal sections. They did have their own formation, but the 6 emperors stood at the front, while the civil and military ministers stood on the left and right. They flew in an orderly manner according to their positions and titles of nobility, and did not care about cultivation techniques, specialties, or the characteristics of their magical treasures. If such a formation were to arrive at Liyuan Galaxy, which was located outside Myriad Immortals' planet, and was suddenly attacked by an enemy, it would definitely be thrown into a panic, and nothing good would come out of it. However, the formation looked magnificent, and was a good way to put on a show. Very quickly, the company came to the deepest part of the lake. Before them was a jade-colored memorial arch, which was glistening and translucent, emitting a silver beam of light that pierced straight into the sky. On top of the memorial arch, there was a row of ancient seal script, which read, Tsang Ao Immortal Abode. The material of the memorial arch was the finest cold-fat jade, and it was nourished by a small energy vein underneath. After 2 eons of time, the memorial arch itself had transformed into a rare and precious treasure. Now, the 200 feet tall memorial arch only had a thin layer of jade skin left on it, while the rest of the jade had turned into a clump of green silver, sticky jade essence that was hovering in the middle of the memorial arch. After 2 great calamities, over 10 billion years, the amount of natural energy accumulated in the jade marrow was shockingly enormous. The dense natural energy was so dense that it seemed to be bursting out from the bottom of the lake, turning the bottom of the lake with a circumference of 100 miles into a paradise filled with abundant natural energy. Patriarch Jiang Yun and Qing Xian exchanged a glance. Suddenly, both of them stretched out their right hands and began playing a finger-guessing game. After 3 rounds, Patriarch Jiang Yun was the winner while laughing out loud. Immediately, the memorial arch belonged to White Cloud Immortal Sect. The old Taoist Qing Xian slapped his right hand fiercely a few times while cursing, as if he was blaming himself for being so useless and throwing away such an extraordinary treasure. Wu Qi and the others were struck dumb by what they saw. How could this be possible? How could a rare and precious treasure be owned by someone like that? On the other hand, the disciples of both immortal sects turned a blind eye to it, as if it was not the first time these 2 ancestral masters played this game. Noticing the puzzled look on Wu Qi's face, Qing Wu Immortal transmitted her voice to Wu Qi and said, Jiang Yun and Qing Xian are true brothers who have gone through life and death together. The 4 of them have been cultivating the Tao together, traveling the world together, and have been friends for nearly 100,000 years. For 100,000 years, White Cloud Immortal Sect and Tranquil Vimla Sect have supported each other, and that's why they are able to hold up a piece of heaven and earth in Liyuan Galaxy. You don't have to be so courteous with Tranquil Vimla Sect. It's the same for them to us. Wu Qi gave Patriarch Jiang Yun, Qing Xian, and Qing Xian an envious look. It was really amazing that such a friendship could last for nearly 100,000 years without being affected by any external factors. When he was still on Earth, he had seen too many brave and righteous men, who would stab their brothers in life and death dozens of times in the back just for a piece of bread, causing their brothers in life and death to die tragically on the spot. After the ownership of the Spirit Jade Arch was decided, all 6 heaven immortals exchanged a glance. Patriarch Jiang Yun unleashed the white cloud sky-veiling flag, covering all the people behind him with it. Layers of white clouds wheeled around him as he smiled and said, "Today, we are fated to enter the immortal abode. If there are dangers lurking in the immortal abode, you must come out quickly and run for your lives. If there are not too many dangers in the immortal abode, you can try your luck. If you can find 1 or 2 immortal items, according to the sect rules, they will belong to you. According to the sect rules, if you can find 3 or more treasures of the same grade, you will have to hand them over to the sect. Do you understand?" Wu Qi was taken aback, while Yan Dan and the others looked at Patriarch Jiang Yun with great astonishment. The sect rules of White Cloud Immortal Sect and Tranquil Vimla Sect were extremely lax. Even if a disciple of Ho Tian realm found 2 immortal items in the abode, they would belong to that disciple as well. A sect rule like this was simply. Wu Qi took a deep breath and nodded his head inwardly. It looked like he had hit the jackpot, as he had bumped into a pretty good sect. If he found something good in the future, he would not have to hide it all the time. Rubbing the 2 rings on his finger, Wu Qi turned and gave Lu Buwei a grin. Lu Buwei gave Wu Qi a look with a smile on his face and nodded slowly. 6 heaven immortal patriarchs waved their right hands at the same time, unleashing 6 immortal thunderbolts. The arch in front of them shook abruptly, and in an instant, a door glinting brilliantly was opened up. A large sheet of dense immortal energy came rolling and rolling toward them. Wu Qi and the others felt as if they had just drunk some strong wine, and their heads were dizzy, nearly passing out from the shock. Patriarch Jiang Yun cried out hastily, "All disciples below the realm of nascent divinity, hold your breaths. The immortal energy is not something you can handle right now. Disciples of nascent divinity realm, remember this. Look into your body with your divine will. When your nascent divinity absorbs the immortal energy and emits a golden gleam, do not absorb any more, or you will face the risk of having your body explode." Upon hearing Patriarch Jiang Yun's words, Wu Qi quickly held his breath. However, the 10 Jin Dan in his 7 stealing heaven meridians began to devour the immortal energy hovering on the surface of his body like hungry wolves. Wu Qi was startled at first, then struck with wild joy. Chapter 296. Amidst the immortal aura that looked like white clouds, Wu Qi was sitting cross-legged under a luxuriant 7-berries fig tree, exercising the 7 foundation establishment technique with all his might and crazily absorbing the immortal aura from the outside world. Within the meridians in both of his arms, 10 Jin Dan shone brilliantly, and had grown to the size of a chicken. The Jin Dan was extremely solid, with large sheets of 5-colored auspicious lights coiling around it. An enormous amount of immortal aura was being absorbed and spat out from the Jin Dan, quickly transforming into innate energies that circulated around his body. The immortal aura was a kind of immortal aura that only immortals could absorb and use. Its nature was comparable to the Jin Dan nectar, and the nascent soul purple energy, which were regarded as the life of nascent soul cultivators. The energy contained in a single thread of immortal aura was equal to 10,000 units of acquired energies of 5 elements. It was a pure and overbearing energy. Unless one had the body of a heaven immortal, once any other cultivator absorbed it into their body would explode and they would die for sure. Only nascent divinity cultivators, who had half a foot into the door of heaven immortal, could absorb a little bit of immortal aura to temper their nascent divinity. However, the 10 Jin Dan that Wu Qi condensed with the 7 foundation establishment technique could absorb the immortal aura without any limitation. On top of that, only 100 units of immortal aura could be transformed into 1 unit of innate energies through his Jin Dan. The nature of the innate energies now was at least 100 times purer than before, and contained an incredible life force and immense divine power. After being nourished by the innate energies, Wu Qi was like a butterfly in a cocoon, and his body began to go through a tremendous transformation. Sitting cross-legged, the muscles on Wu Qi's body were wriggling at an incredible speed, while his bones and internal organs were rubbing against each other and producing crisp popping noises. About 4 hours later, Wu Qi suddenly fished out a golden vat filled with dragon blood essence from the black dragon spirit ring. Like a whale sucking in water, Wu Qi took a deep breath towards the golden vat. Tens of thousands of kilograms of blood essence transformed into a long beam of light and was quickly swallowed by him. While circulating the 7 foundation establishment technique at top speed, he was also using the dragon transformation script to temper his fleshly body. Abruptly, a high-temperature heat wave burst out from his body, as a large amount of pitch black and sticky filth sprayed out from the surface of his skin. In just a blink of an eye, a thick layer of filth had covered his entire body. The 10 Jin Dan in his 7 stealing heaven meridians continued to spin. Because of the nourishment from the immortal energies, the Jin Dan quickly expanded to the size of a fist, and then was forcibly compressed and quenched by Wu Qi using a mystic technique from Scroll of Stealing. With each round of compression and quenching, the innate energies of 5 elements that burst out from the Jin Dan would become purer and denser. When Wu Qi had compressed and quenched the Jin Dan for the 9th time, the innate energies of 5 elements that burst out from the Jin Dan had reached a level comparable to the energy of an early-stage nascent soul cultivator. Cracking noises could be heard from all over his body, as Wu Qi's body expanded and shrunk abruptly. After the 9th round of compression and expansion, the filth on Wu Qi's skin suddenly exploded, and the layer of skin on his body cracked, revealing a new layer of skin that was as fair as jade and smooth as suet. Wu Qi snorted coldly, then casually clenched his fist and thrust it forward. Vaguely, a 5-colored ray could be seen flickering on his 5 fingers, then abruptly condensed into his palm, transforming into a tiny purple-gold lightning bolt that shot out from his palm. A loud boom rang out, as a 100 feet tall fence made from celestial dark iron that had lived for over 100 million years shattered into pieces. The broken fence flew up into the air, and was melted into molten iron by the extremely high temperature contained in the lightning bolt. The celestial dark iron was as tough as an upper-grade defensive magical treasure, but it was shattered into pieces by Wu Qi with just a single palm thunder. It was not hard to tell how powerful his innate energies of 5 elements had become. Wonderful. Wu Qi let out a long laugh. Suddenly, his soul and his spiritual ocean transformed into a ball of misty light and quickly rushed into his Jin Dan, which was located in his 7 stealing heaven meridians. His soul was divided into 10 equal parts and fused with 10 Jin Dan. Immediately, his thumb-sized purple-gold Jin Dan burst out with a blinding light. On the smooth surface of each Jin Dan, countless images of Wu Qi were seen wheeling at high speed, looking extremely mystical. The immortal energy is indeed much stronger than the ordinary natural energies. Only those who cultivate the Scroll of Stealing can use the immortal energy to cultivate in the Jin Dan realm. Wu Qi thought to himself proudly, Jin Dan is a unity deity, and the soul is contained within the soul. This is the cultivation base of the middle stage of Jin Dan realm. Shaking his neck, Wu Qi was about to absorb more immortal energy, trying to push his cultivation base to the peak of Jin Dan realm. However, right when he circulated the innate energies of 5 elements in his body, countless wounds suddenly burst open on both of his arms. Wu Qi felt helpless, and he had to stop his attempt. Currently, his innate energies of 5 elements were extremely powerful, and had exceeded the limit of his fleshly body. He had to go through a long period of arduous cultivation to strengthen the foundation of his fleshly body, only then could he improve his cultivation base again. The Scroll of Stealing focused on the foundation, and without a strong foundation, his future achievements would be limited. Wu Qi felt helpless, and he could only let the Jin Dan keep absorbing innate energies of 5 elements to strengthen his fleshly body. Together with the dragon transformation script, the strength of his fleshly body was gradually increasing. Now that he had reached the middle stage of Jin Dan realm, his soul had fused with the Jin Dan, and the Jin Dan had given birth to its own intelligence. The energies in his body were constantly circulating. In the future, his cultivation base would progress at a tremendous pace, much faster than before. He rose to his feet, casually plucked 2 fruits from the 7 seeds fig tree and ate them. After that, Wu Qi gave the surroundings a casual glance. 1 month ago, when Wu Qi and the company carefully entered the Tsang-Ao immortal abode, they were suddenly enveloped by an auspicious cloud that emerged from the ground, and all of them were thrown to different places in the immortal abode. Wu Qi was quite lucky, as he was thrown to a garden of flowers and fruits in the immortal abode. This place was filled with an abundance of immortal energies, and countless flowers, fruit trees, and rare spirit herbs were planted here. Wu Qi was more than happy to stay here and focus on his cultivation. With the help of the nearly endless immortal energies, he pushed his cultivation base to the middle stage of Jin Dan realm, where the Jin Dan had fused with his soul. Fortunately, the immortal energies in this immortal abode were endless. If Wu Qi wanted to achieve his current cultivation base by relying on the ordinary natural energies in the outside world, it would take him at least 1,000 years of hard work. After all, the energy contained in one portion of immortal energies was equal to 10,000 portions of ordinary natural energies. Sang-ao immortal abode had accumulated the immortal energies for 2 great epochs, and no one had ever used them before. That was why Wu Qi was able to use them wantonly. After letting out a loud laugh, Wu Qi's eyes shone with a bright gleam, and he exercised the mystic eyes of universe with all his might. In an instant, all the restrictive spells in the garden, which measured about 1,000 acres in circumference, were completely exposed in his eyes. With his cultivation base suddenly improved by 1 level, the power of all the divine abilities and mystic techniques of Wu Qi had increased by more than 10 times. Every single herb and fruit tree in this garden was protected by restrictive spells. However, the strength of these restrictive spells was not strong, and they were not mainly used for attacking, but mainly used to maintain a constant temperature and humidity. After finding out the root of these restrictive spells, Wu Qi carefully came to the center of the garden, to a white jade field that measured about 1 acre in circumference. This white garden was paved with the finest white jade, and only a few dozen purple grasses were planted in the field, which was several tens of feet thick. The grasses were shaped like calamus, and their stems and leaves were stretched out like ribbons, swaying gently amidst the white immortal energies even though there was no wind. A few fist-sized golden fruits were growing on top of the grasses. Each of these fruits was shaped like a human brain, and were emitting a dazzling and strange gleam. Heavenly wit fruit. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes into 2 thin lines. It was an extremely rare spirit herb. It was a spirit fruit that could awaken the intellect of any human or animal, giving them an incredible intelligence. Each spirit fruit could only be eaten once by a person, and if the person consumed too much, his brain would be burned by the heavenly flame, turning it into ashes and killing him. A single spirit fruit could create an existence with a superhuman intelligence, and at the same time, it could enhance that person's ability to sense the Tao of heaven and earth by at least 3 to 10 times. The higher the innate intelligence of a person was, the greater the enhancement would be. And, the most fundamental cultivation base of a cultivator was the understanding of the Tao of heaven and earth. A single heavenly wit fruit could enhance one's ability to sense by at least 3 times, which meant it could save 3 times the time of cultivation. Patriarch Jiang Yun had been cultivating arduously for nearly 100,000 years, but he was only very close to the realm of 35th tier heaven immortal. If he could consume a single heavenly wit fruit, even if it could only save him 3 times the time, he should have been able to advance to the next realm 70,000 years ago. There were 18 heavenly wit grasses here, and a total of 57 heavenly wit fruits. There was also a large area of residue of the heavenly wit fruit on the ground. Apparently, there were countless ripening heavenly wit fruits here, but no one picked them, and eventually, they all withered by themselves. After a moment of silence, Wu Qi plucked all the heavenly wit fruits and swallowed one of them. After exercising his cultivation technique and regulating his breath for 15 minutes, Wu Qi finally digested the powerful medicinal strength of the heavenly wit fruit. As expected, he felt that his eyes and ears had become sharper, as if his body had melted and fused with the surrounding heaven and earth. His communication with the heaven and earth had been enhanced in a very mysterious way. After putting away the other 56 heavenly wit fruits into a jade box, Wu Qi looked at the remaining spirit herbs and shook his head. The spirit herbs ripened once in 36,000 years, and they had to grow in a place with an abundance of immortal energy. As of now, Wu Qi did not have an immortal abode for him to use, and even if he managed to transplant them, they would wither and die. After plucking all the ready-made heavenly wit fruits, whoever still wanted them would have to come back after 36,000 years. Next, Wu Qi took out all the spirit herbs in the flower bed, either consuming them or plucking them. He had looted all the spirit herbs that caught his eye. As for some spirit herbs that could be transplanted, he also spent some effort and temporarily stored them in the spirit breeding ring. But too bad, the quality of the spirit breeding ring was not high enough, and it could not store immortal energy. Otherwise, Wu Qi would really have the thought to loot the entire flower bed. After spending a few days of effort, he had looted everything that could be taken away. Suddenly, voices were heard coming from outside the main entrance of the flower bed. "Great General, there is a spirit seedling garden here." Upon hearing the voices, Wu Qi rolled his eyes and twisted his body, transforming into a stream of yellow mist and plunging into the ground. Carefully avoiding some restrictive spells underground, Wu Qi exercised the mystic eyes of universe to the fullest, following the direction of the few underground energy veins. Using the divine ability of searching for energy veins found in Scroll of Stealing, he headed straight towards the core of Tsang-Ao Immortal Abode, the spirit cave with the richest immortal energy. When passing by a small energy vein about 3 miles away from the spirit cave, Wu Qi could clearly hear Patriarch Jiang Yun's voice coming from above his head. "This is indeed an immortal abode of an ancient heaven immortal, as the restrictive spells here are indeed very mysterious. Fellow Taoists, let's work together and break this restrictive spell first. This is the treasure vault, and if you want to find something good, it should be here." Upon hearing that, Wu Qi was secretly amused. Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others were still breaking the restrictive spells. In his eyes, the restrictive spells left behind by an ancient heaven immortal were not very complicated. By using the innate earth element escape art, he could just travel underground and avoid a few crucial cores of the formation, and then he could easily go straight into the formation. Why would it be so troublesome? In fact, this formation was just an ordinary illusionary spirit formation, formed by combining 36 celestial dippers and 72 earthly evils. It was based on illusory techniques and supplemented by killing formations. Although it could be considered as a magical formation, without the control of its master, its power was just ordinary. Of course, it would be very difficult to break it from the front. However, it was too easy for Wu Qi to sneak into the formation by following the energy veins underground. Shaking his head, Wu Qi stealthily followed a small energy vein and plunged straight into the spirit cave. Chapter 297. It was a place where 9 underground energy veins converged, forming a huge spirit cave, measuring several acres in circumference and reaching 10,000 miles underground. Dense spiritual energy surged up and gathered by a 9 firmament true immortal essence concentration grand formation. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was purified and compressed. Finally, it was transformed by a silver pearl the size of a human head in the eye of the formation, from ordinary spiritual energy of heaven and earth to pure immortal spiritual energy. Wu Qi carefully avoided all the restrictive spells along the way. There were a few times when he had to condense his body and use the innate earth element escape art to compress his body into the size of a strand of hair. Only then could he pass through the densely packed restrictive spells. When he arrived at the center of the 9-cloud true immortal energy gathering formation, Wu Qi gave the surrounding formations a glance, then put away the silver pearl into the black dragon spirit ring without hesitation. In Scroll of Stealing, there were some higher-grade formations that could transform immortal energies, but these formations could only be constructed with some unique natural treasures. The name of this silver pearl was Energy Gathering and Immortal Ascension Ball. It was crafted by some almighty experts using some extremely precious materials, and was specifically used to transform ordinary natural energies into immortal energies. After all, only a few blessed lands could have an immortal's cave abode that possessed immortal energies. In the ancient times, if ordinary heaven immortals wished to own an immortal's cave abode with rich immortal energies, they would have to rely on all kinds of transformation formations. The Energy Gathering and Immortal Ascension Ball was created for those lower-grade immortals who did not have the qualification to occupy immortal energy's underground veins. With this pearl, Wu Qi could construct a similar formation himself, and in the future, he would have an immortal's cave abode all to himself. However, Judging from the quality of this energy gathering and immortal ascension ball, it was just a lower grade item, not some high grade item. Also, the immortal's cave abode that could be constructed with it was not some high grade blessed land. Nevertheless, for Wu Qi at his current stage, it was more than enough. After taking away the core of the formation, Wu Qi carefully traveled upward. Right above him was the treasure vault of Tsang Ao Immortal Abode. After all, it was an important place where treasures were stored. Therefore, the restrictive spells and formations here were extremely complicated, and there were a total of 36 of them. But too bad, all these formations were described in detail in the Scroll of Stealing. Even if Wu Qi closed his eyes, he could still find the way to break the formations according to the instructions in the Scroll of Stealing. After breaking through all 36 layers of defensive formations with ease, Wu Qi came to the most important treasure vault in Tsang Ao Immortal Abode. This was a simple yet elegant hall. In the middle of the hall, there was a staircase leading to the upper level. Wu Qi extended his divine sense upwards. The treasury pavilion had a total of 7 floors, and the floor he was on had nothing but rows of wooden shelves. Wu Qi shook his head helplessly and followed the stairs to the hall on the upper floor. There were fewer wooden shelves here, but they were still empty. Not a single item was left behind. Climbing all the way up, Wu Qi reached the highest level, the 7th level of the treasury. Only then did he see that there were 3 light red jade tables lined up in a row, with a few items sparsely left on them. These few items were emitting a faint spirit gleam, and a vague pressure was emanating from them that made Wu Qi, who was standing several tens of feet away, feel a suffocating feeling in his heart. Obviously, these were some pretty decent immortal treasures. Judging from the marks left on the tables, there should be many treasures stored here, but it seemed they had been taken away by someone. Wu Qi pondered for a while. It seemed like during the Great War, the owner of this place had distributed many treasures to his disciples to fight against the enemies, and never returned, leaving behind only a few treasures that he did not bring with him. Therefore, it was not hard to imagine that the treasures left here would be the weakest ones. Most likely, the owner of this place did not fancy them at all, and that was why he left them behind. However, no matter how much he did not fancy them, they were still immortal items used by immortals. Therefore, with his current strength, Wu Qi would definitely not turn his back on them. Excitedly, Wu Qi came before the tables and began to carefully examine the few treasures placed on them. The first one to bear the brunt was a clump of mist, about the size of a fist, that looked as dense as water and was emitting tiny electric arcs from time to time. Carefully, he reached out his hand toward the clump of mist. But, before his finger could touch it, a tiny electric arc had already struck him. Wu Qi let out a miserable howl as he was knocked several tens of feet away, knocking his head against the wall behind him. His body twitched violently for a long while, and only then did he regain the ability to move. It was a clump of heavenly thunder essence, which was extracted from the thunder tribulation high up in the sky. Cautiously, Wu Qi returned to the table. After pondering for a while, he simply took out the cold electric mirror. It was a treasure found by Catfish Flood Dragon in her underwater mansion. It should be a legacy left behind by an ancient immortal, and it was a magical treasure with lightning element. Perhaps. Right after he took out the cold electric mirror, and before Wu Qi could bring the mirror to the heavenly thunder essence, the clump of mist suddenly transformed into a tiny electric arc and pierced through the surface of the mirror. Immediately, the cold electric mirror shone with a dazzling light, and slowly transformed from the solid surface of the mirror into a clump of electric plasma that looked like water ripples. A great amount of electric arcs kept flashing and rocking on the purple-blue surface of the mirror, while deep and muffled thunderclaps could be heard coming out from the vaguely rippling surface of the mirror. A faintly discernible consciousness emerged from the cold electric mirror, carefully reaching out to Wu Qi. After absorbing the heavenly thunder essence, the cold electric mirror suddenly gave birth to a consciousness that was as clear as that of a newborn baby. In an instant, the mirror had been upgraded to the category of a spirit item. Wu Qi was struck with great joy. Hastily, he sent a thread of divine will into the cold electric mirror, carefully fusing it with the newborn, pure white and flawless mirror spirit. The cold electric mirror let out a joyful and excited voice, then abruptly transformed into a beam of electric arc and fused with Wu Qi's body, turning into a tiny, faintly discernible purple-blue mark between his brows. With a thought from Wu Qi, the faint mark disappeared without a trace. However, Wu Qi could clearly sense that the cold electric mirror was right between his brows, and was constantly absorbing the pure innate energies of 5 elements in his body to temper itself. While being tempered by the innate energies of 5 elements, the cold electric mirror kept sending waves of contented spiritual ripples to Wu Qi. He was enjoying the improvement brought by the innate aura. Now I have another good treasure. Wu Qi smiled faintly as he turned to look at the other few items on the table. In the middle of the table was a long purple rope, about 10 feet long and as thick as a thumb. There were 3 vermilion talismans tied to the rope. When Wu Qi touched the rope, he immediately felt a strong resistance coming from it. A very strong paralyzing force smashed into Wu Qi's arm, making his body stiffen abruptly, and even the circulation of his divine will became stiff. Fortunately, he was practicing a very magical cultivation technique. Tenjin Dan shot out a large amount of innate energies, which melted away the strange paralyzing force. Only then did he regain his ability to move. It was an immortal item used to bind the enemy, making them unable to move. However, the item spirit inside this immortal item was vaguely emanating a wild and untamed aura, as if no one could touch it, and it was as if no one could do anything to Lao Tzu. With an item spirit like this, it was no wonder that this rare control immortal item was abandoned by the owner of Tsang-Ao Immortal Abode. If one were to use it in a battle, and failed to trap the enemy, it would be one's own misfortune. After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi shot out 5 strands of innate energies of 5 colors from his fingertip. With an indifferent tone, he said to the rope, I know the so-called immortal items are those whose item spirits have reached the level of heaven immortal through their own cultivation. Take a look at the properties of my energy. If you like, you can fuse with me, and listen to my commands in the future. Nourished by my innate energy essence, perhaps you can. A strong purple light flashed, and the rope had already squeezed into Wu Qi's palm impatiently, turning into a tiny purple mark on his left wrist. The item spirit of the rope had opened up the core of its divine sense, sending an impatient spiritual wave to Wu Qi, cut the crap. If I had told you earlier that you possess innate energy, your grandson would not have listened to you. Quickly refine and control Lao Tzu, then let Lao Tzu have a taste of your blood essence. This guy. Speechless, Wu Qi rolled his eyes and sent a seal of his nascent divinity into the core of the rope. A great amount of information rushed into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean and branded into his nascent divinity. The name of the rope was Spirit Restricting Rope, an immortal item crafted by a 33rd tier heaven immortal with a great deal of hard work. However, perhaps the heaven immortal's brain was suddenly fried. In order to increase the power of the Spirit Restricting Rope, when he was refining it, he used the universal blood sacrifice devil summoning technique to attract a devil's soul with a strange power from the outer realm of demons and devils as the artifact spirit. As an immortal, how could he control an immortal item with a fiend's soul who regarded immortals as his mortal enemy? Was this not a joke? If Wu Qi had not lured the rope with innate energy, it would not have obeyed anyone's command, unless some other powerful immortal had completely destroyed its item spirit. Fortunately, he had lured it with innate energy, or else, with Wu Qi's current cultivation base, he would not be able to refine a real immortal item. Right after he finished refining the Spirit Restricting Rope, 30% of the blood essence in Wu Qi's body was consumed. A purple glow burst out from his left wrist, and the Spirit Restricting Rope breathed a long sigh contentedly and said, "Damn it. Delicious. From now on, give me the same amount of innate energy essence every 10 years, and I'll obey your command. Otherwise, we'll part ways, and neither of us will owe each other anything." Wu Qi was speechless, and could only shake his head. This Spirit Restricting Rope was full of character, and the immortal who crafted it was not only full of character, but also an idiot. Fortunately, Wu Qi never cared about his own blood essence and energy essence, so he could take as much of it as he wanted. After retrieving the rope, there were still 3 items on the table. A zither, which could produce the sound of thunder and shatter one's soul. A jade ring, which had a storage space 10 times wider than the black dragon spirit ring, and could expand as the cultivation base of its owner improved. A fist-sized, smooth ball that looked like it was made from a sponge. Vaguely, countless rosy clouds could be seen lingering in it. Wu Qi had no idea what this thing could be used for. There were always some immortals who crafted some strange items. Although there were countless precious treasures described in the Scroll of Stealing, it was impossible for them to include all the strange items crafted by those immortals. Looking at the soft, translucent ball, Wu Qi was having a headache as well. Shaking his head, Wu Qi was about to give the zither to Princess Xiangluo. Before he could figure out what to do with the jade ring, the dragon's soul suddenly sprung out from the black dragon spirit ring and swallowed the ring. A large sheet of bright light burst out from within the black dragon spirit ring. Wu Qi could clearly feel that the ring had begun to level up. He was rendered speechless by the fact that this guy could actually level up by devouring the same magical storage item. It was indeed true that dragons were greedy by nature. Carefully, he forced out a tiny bit of innate energy essence of 5 elements and tempted the 5 thunders soul-shattering zither to merge with him. After that, Wu Qi picked up the ball and played with it for a while, then casually shoved it into his sleeve. Deep, muffled rumbles were heard coming from outside. Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others had arrived at the entrance of the treasure pavilion. Chapter 298. Hearing Patriarch Jiang Yun's laughter coming from outside, Wu Qi quickly transformed into a stream of yellow mist and fled back the way he came. After leaving the treasure vault, only then did Wu Qi communicate with the 5 thunders soul-shattering zither with his divine will. He wanted to know why it was not brought out by the master of Tsung Ao immortal abode. After contacting the item spirit of the 5 thunders soul-shattering zither, Wu Qi was rendered speechless. It was also an immortal item that had a flaw. No matter who it was, unless he or she possessed the cultivation base of 33rd tier heaven immortal or above, once he or she used this zither to fight against an enemy, all the energies and immortal energies in his or her body would be completely sucked out, and he or she would unleash an all-out attack. If the 5 thunders soul-shattering zither managed to kill the enemy, he or she would win the battle. But, if it failed to kill the enemy, he or she would be killed by the enemy's counterattack. It was an immortal item that would either succeed or die trying. Any immortal with a sane mind would keep it in their treasure vault as a collectible, and would never use it to fight against an enemy. What kind of lousy treasures are these? Wu Qi had no other choice. The zither had attached itself to him, and it knew that he possessed innate energy essence. Therefore, he would not feel at ease if he gave it to someone else. Therefore, he could only give it to Princess Xiangluo, and tell her not to use it when her cultivation base was not high enough. This was an item that could take his or her life. After randomly finding a small spirit cave to hide in, Wu Qi hid under the ground, took out the smooth ball, and began to examine it carefully. There was no item spirit in the ball, so he could not understand its origin through communicating with it. It was light and weightless, and vaguely, there were countless clouds shrouding it. But, it did not leak out any energy or aura. Wu Qi really had no idea what it was. He exercised the mystic eyes of universe, but he could not find anything wrong with it. He sent his spiritual sense over, but within the range of his spiritual sense, there was nothing there. It felt like there was nothing there at all. Wu Qi pondered for a while, bit his fingertip, and dripped 2 drops of blood on it. However, the ball still did not react. The 2 drops of blood slowly slid down the smooth surface of the ball, and there was nothing unusual. After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi shook his head and pinched the ball into a round shape. As he was about to shove it into the black dragon's spirit ring, the burping soul of the black dragon had already squeezed out from the ring. He looked at the ball and said in astonishment, "Oh, this thing. Who has the guts to steal a phoenix's unhatched egg and use its egg membrane to refine this kind of fire sac?" This is a fire sac used to store all kinds of natural and acquired spirit fires. Store all kinds of innate and acquired spirit fires. With a thought in his mind, Wuqi pressed the ball against his forehead. Immediately, an invisible suction force came over, and the weightless ball transformed into a stream of light and plunged into Wuqi's spiritual ocean. Accompanied by a melodious phoenix cry, a vague shadow of a golden phoenix wheeled once, then transformed into an exquisite, crystal-clear, phoenix-shaped palace lantern in Wuqi's spiritual ocean. The divine flame of order, which Wuqi had spent a great effort to restrain in Wuqi's spiritual ocean, was now dancing and dancing happily on top of the phoenix's upturned beak. The innate energies of 5 elements were tumbling and rocking rapidly in the 5 spirit objects manifested in Wuqi's spiritual ocean, unleashing a great amount of innate energies of 5 elements, which were absorbed by the phoenix-shaped palace lantern. Slowly, they transformed into an extremely pure innate spirit fire essence, slowly fusing with the divine flame of order. Nourished by this innate spirit fire essence, the divine flame of order was growing stronger at a speed that Wuqi could sense. Gradually, it merged with Wuqi's mind, and with every passing second, Wuqi's divine will was able to penetrate a little bit into the divine flame of order. Wuqi praised, "It is indeed a good treasure. I can't believe it can be used like this." The soul of the black dragon sneered and said, "Of course it is a good treasure. But, thinking about its origin, if this thing is discovered by an almighty expert of the Phoenix clan, you will definitely have your corpse whipped 10,000 times. Every Phoenix fire sack represents a descendant of the Phoenix clan who had their life taken away. Hee hee. This is going to be a big feud." Wuqi gave the black dragon's soul a cold glance, then casually threw out a tiny stream of divine flame of order. The black dragon's soul howled miserably as it was burned by the flame. Hastily, it begged for mercy and squeezed back into the black dragon's spirit ring, not daring to mock Wuqi anymore. Smiling proudly, Wuqi lowered his voice and murmured, "Do you think I'm afraid of an almighty expert of the Phoenix clan?" Pursing his lips, Wuqi sneered in a low voice and said with a lack of confidence, "If I can't defeat him, can't I just run away?" Right at this moment, Lu Buwei's voice was heard coming from the ground a few feet above Wuqi's head, "A bunch of useless fools. It has been more than a month, why haven't you found that little thief yet? Hurry up and find him, then tell young Master Zhao Ling that Wuqi must be killed. For all these years, I've never suffered such a great loss." Lu Buwei's voice was getting clearer. Obviously, he was walking towards them. Then, Lu Buwei sneered and said, "Tell young Master Zhao Ling, if he can kill Wuqi, I'll marry Lu to him, and support him to build his own power in Great Zhao, suppressing all his brothers. If he can't do it, don't blame me for finding someone else to cooperate with." So, it's Lu Buwei. Is he still planning to kill me? Wuqi was filled with anger, and as he was about to dash out and kill Lu Buwei at all costs, a bone-piercing cold ghost aura suddenly came coming from above his head. Lu Buwei had already activated the 5 ghosts technique and vanished without a trace. Only 4 subordinates of Lu Buwei were still kneeling on one knee, sending Lu Buwei off. Wuqi cursed inwardly at how fast this old man ran. Without hesitation, he exercised an escape art and followed behind these 4 subordinates of Lu Buwei. 4 men rose to their feet and sprinted forward, bypassing several dozens of courtyards and pavilions in Sang Ao Immortal Abode, and finally came to the most remote courtyard in the northeast corner. There were a few exquisite pavilions in the courtyard. A tall and slender young man clad in a soft armor was seen sitting on a stone bench right in the center of the courtyard. He had 2 beautiful girls clad in soft armors, who were dressed like military officers. His hands were moving quickly under their armors. Both girls allowed the young man to do whatever he wanted with a calm expression. Their eyes were cold and sharp like the edge of a blade, and they were staring at a few cultivators standing outside the door, watching them break the restrictive spells on the door. After a while, the young man pulled his hands out from under the girls' armors and said in a cold voice, "A bunch of useless fools. Why haven't you broken the restrictive spells after spending so much effort? Don't you claim to be the best masters of formation in Handan City? Why are you taking so long to open the door? It has been so many days, and what good stuff have you found for me in this immortal abode?" The few cultivators lowered their heads speechlessly. They kept performing incantation gestures, carefully breaking all kinds of restrictive spells outside the abode. For Wu Qi, these restrictive spells were like a no-man's land, but for these cultivators, they were profound, abstruse, and difficult to break. After all, these restrictive spells were left behind by ancient immortals, and were not something that could be easily broken by mere masters of formation who had not even reached mid-stage nascent soul realm. Even though 2 great apocalypses had passed, and even though the energy veins underneath this immortal abode had gone through a tremendous transformation, causing all the restrictive spells to gradually lose their energy source and their effectiveness to be greatly weakened, they were still not something that these nascent soul cultivators could break easily. On the contrary, existences with the overall strength of Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others were able to walk freely in this immortal abode. 4 of Lu Buwei's trusted subordinates strode into the courtyard and bowed to the young man. One of them said in a low voice, "Young master, Patriarch has said that if young master can find Wu Qi and kill him, he will marry Miss Lu, to you." The young man, Zhao Ling, raised his brows and casually threw the 2 beautiful captains aside. He clapped his hands lightly and said with a smile, "Old Mr. Lu has finally spoken. He, Miss Lu, is gifted with intelligence and a gentle character. Although she is not as decisive and murderous as Miss Xiao Xiao, she is a good match for me. Since old Mr. Lu has agreed to my request, naturally, I will try my best to find that Wu Qi." Zhao Ling grinned coldly and said coolly, "Apart from these few useless fools, all of you will go look for Wu Qi. When you find him, do not clash with him. Let me deal with him myself. I heard that he is engaged to Great Yan's Princess Zhangluo. I will kill him and seize his wife, how delightful that is." While speaking complacently, Zhao Ling suddenly threw his head back and let out a wild laugh into the sky. The aura of early-stage nascent soul realm spread out in all directions without any concealment. Hiding underground, Wu Qi was infuriated when he heard Zhao Ling's words. Zhao Ling wanted to please Lu Buwei, and wanted to kill him, but that was not all. How dare he lay his hands on Princess Zhangluo? A vicious flame of anger rose in Wu Qi's heart, and a murderous intent towards Zhao Ling and his entire family rose in his mind. Zhao Ling was the youngest son of Great Zhao's emperor, Zhao Sheng. For a moment, Wu Qi had a bad feeling towards the imperial family of Great Zhao, and even all the civil and military officials of Great Zhao. Even though some of them were famous figures like Lian Pe and Lin Xiangru, because of Zhao Ling, Wu Qi had his eyes set on them. With rumbling footsteps, the 2 female generals and the rest of the people in the courtyard left, leaving Zhao Ling and 5 early-stage nascent soul cultivators, who were working hard to break the restrictive spells of the abode, in this remote courtyard. Zhao Ling pulled out a jar of wine from somewhere, and while drinking, he scolded the 5 array formation masters, scolding them from their founding ancestor all the way to their descendants 18 generations later. The 5 formation masters could not even lift their heads up from the curses. With a gloomy face, they simply shut off their 5 senses and focused on breaking the restrictive spell. They no longer paid any attention to Zhao Ling's vicious curses. Zhao Ling was a member of Great Zhao's imperial clan, and a very favored young master. How could these formation masters dare to offend him? Wu Qi smiled. When he found out that those formation masters had shut off their 5 senses, he laughed immediately. It was just killing a little Zhao Ling, and there was no need to make too much noise. But, if he were to release the long bow people to deal with those formation masters, it would be really unnecessary. Chuckling, Wu Qi suddenly poked his head out from under the ground. The spirit-restricting rope shot out from his hand, transforming into a purple beam of light and tightly binding Zhao Ling. With the help of an immortal item, even a heaven immortal would be bound to death, let alone an early-stage nascent soul cultivator like Zhao Ling. Zhao Ling was struck dumb. All the movements of his blood essence, energy, and nascent divinity had come to a standstill, and all his physiological functions had fallen into a state of paralysis. Wu Qi lifted Zhao Ling up, and with a shake of his hand, he pulled him into the ground. Then, he waved the sword of greedy wolf. A black beam flashed across, and a huge wound was opened on Zhao Ling's neck, while a huge amount of blood essence was being absorbed by the sword. With one slash, Wu Qi cut open Zhao Ling's forehead, pierced through his spiritual ocean, and killed his nascent soul. At the same time, the enormous energy essence was completely absorbed by the sword of Greedy Wolf. Then, with a flick of his finger, Wu Qi broke all the restrictive spells in Zhao Ling's storage ring. After that, he took away all the energy stones in the ring, as well as all the medicinal pills and spirit talismans that carried the mark of Great Zhao. After that, he dragged Zhao Ling's dead body and flew several hundred feet forward, then threw the dead body under a large tree. Amidst a cold gleam, the sword of Greedy Wolf hacked Zhao Ling's head and limbs apart. Then, using a tiny bit of Zhao Ling's blood, Wu Qi wrote a row of large characters on the ground, one stroke at a time, using the standard seal script, "The murderer is Lu Buwei." After killing and leaving behind these words, Wu Qi spun and fled into the distance. Chapter 299. Inside the immortal abode, next to a spirit spring that was filled with abundant natural energy, two captains stood beside the mouth of the spring. They were clad in Great Zhao's specially made warrior outfits with arrow sleeves. They had abandoned their loose robes and big sleeves, and looked very capable. They were standing next to the mouth of the spring, staring at a few light purple spirit herbs that looked like ordinary kelp. After a while, one of the high-ranking military officers of Great Zhao carefully stooped down. His right hand was covered with a layer of faint white light. He made a hand gesture, and was about to scoop up a patch of spirit grass for a closer look. Suddenly, the spring water swayed, and a clearly visible face emerged from it. The face grinned, then suddenly stretched out both arms and wrapped them around the captain's neck. With a casual twist, he dragged the captains down into the spring water. Crack! The captain's neck was broken by a tremendous force. Blood gushed out from his mouth, dyeing the spring water red. The other captains standing next to the spring water were taken aback. He roared furiously, holding a bow in his left hand and an arrow in his right. Just as he was about to attack the bizarre face in the spring water, a faint yellow mist suddenly sprayed out from the ground next to his feet. 7 or 8 arms suddenly stretched out from the ground, grabbed his ankles and knees, and dragged him down into the ground. Half of his body sank into the ground in an instant. Damn it! The Great Zhao's captain struggled, trying to shake off those arms that grabbed his legs. But, he had no idea what material these arms were made of, as they were so hard that they did not feel like flesh and blood. He struggled with all his might, but a cracking sound rang out, as all the bones below his waist were crushed by those iron-cast arms. Just as he let out a miserable howl, a sharp sword pierced through the back of his head and between his brows. His body turned stiff, and his nascent soul collapsed instantly. The water of the spring was rippling, and Wu Qi's true form slowly emerged from it. Conveniently, he plucked the fruits growing on a few spirit herbs. Yellow mist sprayed out from all directions, as 18 celestial fiend puppets that looked exactly like Wu Qi squeezed out from the ground. With pale red fiend flame flickering in their eyes, they opened their mouths and took a deep breath. Suddenly, the nascent souls of 2 Great Zhao military officers disintegrated into countless tiny streams of energy, plunging into the bodies of these celestial fiend puppets. The demon soul orb in the puppet's body expanded slightly, and the rate at which it absorbed the spiritual qi of heaven and earth increased. With a pleased expression, Wu Qi gave these celestial fiend puppets a look. With a slight sway of his body, these puppets transformed into half-transparent shadows and gradually fused into Wu Qi's true form. After being nourished by the innate earth element energy essence and cultivating the celestial fiend battle the heaven script, the strength of these puppets was at least 2 times stronger than Wu Qi himself. Therefore, it was a piece of cake for him to launch a sneak attack and kill a few nascent soul realm generals of Great Zhao with the help of the innate spirit escape technique. He looted all the spirit stones from the 2 generals, leaving all the other spirit pills and talismans untouched. After dipping it in the blood of the 2 men, Wu Qi left a line of words on the ground: "The murderer is Lu Buwei." For the next 3 days, Wu Qi kept going in and out of Tsang Ao immortal abode, looting all kinds of rare and precious treasures. Whenever he bumped into Great Zhao's generals and cultivators who were alone, he would kill them without the slightest hesitation. Although his cultivation base was only at the middle stage of Jin Dan realm, his dermic power was comparable to that of nascent Soul realm. On top of that, he had many strange and peculiar toys with him, as well as the spirit-restricting rope, so none of the Great Zhao's generals and cultivators who were targeted by him managed to escape. The energy stones he looted piled up into a small hill, and Wu Qi's wealth had increased by a large margin. The defensive mechanism of Tsang Ao immortal abode was extremely strange. According to the division of 9 palaces, 8 trigrams, and 6 directions, the entire immortal abode was divided into 4 layers, while the front, back, left, and right were divided into 96 different areas. Meanwhile, the group of people who were dragged into the immortal abode by the restrictive mechanism landed in different areas of the 96 different areas. The different areas of the immortal abode were protected by powerful defensive formations, which ordinary cultivators could hardly break through. However, the cultivators in the same area could gather together and travel freely. That was why Zhao Ling was able to gather a group of Great Zhao cultivators around him. However, as they were scattered in different areas, the people from 6 dynasties could not gather together in a large group. Apart from Lu Buwei, who could travel freely between different areas of the immortal abode with his divine ability of 5 ghosts, it was very difficult for the others to gather together. Therefore, Wu Qi seized the opportunity to wantonly kill Great Zhao's generals and cultivators who were alone. As long as it was a group of less than 5 people, they could hardly escape from his attack. Every time he killed a group of people, Wu Qi would leave behind the name of Lu Buwei, the murderer, on the ground. Even though everyone knew it was a scheme to frame Lu Buwei, they still wanted to discuss Lu Buwei, and let him know that there were some people who could not be provoked. Following Zhao Ling's method, he dismembered the bodies of the 2 generals and threw them to the ground. After that, Wu Qi transformed into a stream of yellow mist and plunged back into the ground. Following the defensive formations in Tsang Ao immortal abode, Wu Qi traveled some distance underground. Once again, he released his divine will and sensed a Great Zhao's general, who was clad in a tight outfit with long sleeves and a soft armor. The general's aura faintly fused with the heaven and earth, and he had the cultivation base of early-stage nascent divinity realm. Behind him was a layer of mist drifting and drifting. Vaguely, mountains, rivers, and underground energy veins could be seen, and countless military camps were connected together. A murderous aura towered into the sky from the army, and the rumbling of drums and horns could be heard. Cautiously, Wu Qi poked his head out from behind a rockery next to the general and gave him a glance. According to the portrait Lu Qingfeng had prepared for Wu Qi, this man should be one of the current pillars of Great Zhao's state, Zhao Kuo, a famous general who only knew how to talk on paper. At the moment, Zhao Kuo was carefully confronting a great golden python, which had a horn on its head and a pair of meaty claws under its abdomen. Behind the python was a flat land, measuring several miles in circumference. Countless red grasses, each about 1 foot tall, could be seen growing on the flat land, and thumb-sized berries could be seen growing on the tips of the grasses. Wu Qi could recognize these berries, as they were also the snake blood berries, a rare and precious natural treasure. Snakes and pythons that had yet to transform into flood dragons loved to consume this poisonous snake blood berry, as it could stimulate their bloodline and temper their fleshly bodies, increasing the probability of them transforming into flood dragons. The snake blood berries ripened once every 100 years, and fell once every 100 years. They could not rot for even 100 years, and the poisonous miasma produced after they rotted would also last for 100 years before turning into dust. Unless it was a great snake or python with a profound cultivation base, any other living beings who consumed the snake blood berries would turn into a pile of white bones if they could not resist the deadly poison contained in the berries. Thousands of gigantic flood dragon skeletons were lying on the grassland that had a circumference of several miles. Half of the grassland was filled with pale white bones. There were countless snake blood berries growing on these dragon skeletons. The snake blood berries growing on the dragon skeletons were especially thick and lush. The blood-colored berries were the size of a human head and emitted a magnificent red light that could shake one's soul. Zhao Kuo gripped the pair of steel spears tightly with both hands, staring at the great golden python in front of him, and cried out in a deep voice, "I am in need of a good mount. If you obey me, I'll swear an oath of life and death with you, and bring you away from this place. With your intelligence, don't tell me you still don't see it clearly. Just when those ancestors of yours had the hope of transforming into dragons, they were killed by the restrictive spells of the immortal abode. So what if you've cultivated painstakingly for 1,000,000 years? Didn't you still get killed by the restrictive spells after that?" The great python let out a long hissing sound. His tongue was different from that of ordinary snakes, as it no longer had a fork in the front, but had turned into a perfectly round structure like a human tongue. The serpent hissed in a low voice, "Even if we are killed by the seal, we have to protect the bones of our ancestors. Gold Horn will never leave this place, never. You human cultivators, our ancestors told us that human cultivators are the most cunning and cannot be trusted." The great python, who called himself Gold Horn, opened his mouth and sprayed out a ball of crimson flame. "Get lost, or die." Grinning coldly, Zhao Kuo spun the spears with both hands, making them look like two black whirlwinds that were spinning rapidly. As the invisible whirlwinds swirled around Zhao Kuo, he cried out in a low voice, "Then, I'll beat you until you are convinced. You are destined to be my mount." Wielding the spears, Zhao Kuo shot out two black thunderbolts from his palms, which pounced towards Gold Horn like two black dragons. Not to be outdone, Gold Horn held his head high and sprayed out two crimson flame beams, which twisted and turned in the air like sword beams and tangled with Zhao Kuo's two steel spears. Although Zhao Kuo's steel spears were low-grade magical treasures, they were forged with the essence of 5 metals. On the other hand, the flame beams sprayed out by Gold Horn were extremely hot, and contained some strange poison. After fighting with the flame for a while, the black steel spears were gradually burned to a crimson color. Zhao Kuo's face turned unsightly. He had already stepped into the nascent divinity realm, and although the two steel spears were not his best weapons, they were still low-grade magical treasures. Yet, he was actually forced into such a state by a demon python who had just formed his nascent soul. Gold Horn's innate talent was too bizarre, and it was really difficult to deal with. Just when Zhao Kuo was thinking about how to capture Jin Jiao, another great silver serpent suddenly darted out from the ground nearby. This silver serpent was about the same size as Jin Jiao, about 100 feet long. It opened its mouth and shot out two beams of cold light. Gold Horn kicked backward with his legs, and the cold beams from the silver python smashed heavily onto Zhao Kuo's steel spears. A bitter cold air spread out, and the spears, which had just been heated by the high temperature, were now frozen by the cold air. Countless cracks appeared on the spears, and they fell to the ground with cracking noises. Zhao Kuo laughed out loud, clapped his hands, and said, "Since I have one, I'll give you one. 2 great pythons, and one of them can be given to my father. It's the best." Although the 2 steel spears were destroyed, Zhao Kuo's face did not even twitch. Obviously, he had just carelessly refined the spears with a tiny bit of his blood essence, and did not even leave a tiny bit of his prime nascent divinity in them. After praising the 2 great pythons who were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, Zhao Kuo ran his fingers across his storage ring and pulled out a handful of silver metal balls. He casually threw them out. Immediately, an auspicious cloud rose from the cloud, as several dozens of burly soldiers, each standing 30 feet tall, sprinted out from the cloud, holding various blades and spears in their hands as they charged towards the 2 great pythons. Zhao Kuo laughed and said, "This is the divine ability I'm most proud of, transforming beings into soldiers. As long as I want to, even an army of millions and millions of soldiers can arrive in an instant. You 2 beasts, surrender now, or else." Right when Zhao Kuo threw out the soldiers, Wu Qi had already burrowed into the ground. When Zhao Kuo threw his head back and laughed, Wu Qi had already come out from behind him. He pointed his finger out, and the sword of Greedy Wolf transformed into a dark beam, thrusting towards Zhao Kuo's back. Then, he waved his left hand and unleashed the spirit-restricting rope, which transformed into a blinding purple beam and shot towards Xiao Kuo. While laughing complacently, Xiao Kuo suddenly felt a cold breeze coming from his back. It made his hair stand on end, and without hesitation, he cried out, "Stop! Kuo! I surrender!" The spirit-restricting rope coiled around Xiao Kuo, completely restraining his innate energy, blood essence, and the movement of his soul. Wu Qi halted the sword of greedy wolf, walked slowly before Xiao Kuo, reached out his hand and patted on Xiao Kuo's face. "Xiao Kuo, you're just an armchair strategist. Should I kill you or not?" Chapter 300. While they were capturing Xiao Kuo alive with the power of their immortal items, the two golden and silver pythons were still fighting with dozens of metal soldiers. The golden pythons were good at spitting flames to attack their enemies, while the silver pythons were good at spitting cold beams. The whole sky was filled with cold beams and flames, which made the soldiers summoned by Xiao Kuo produce clanging noises. From time to time, some soldiers were pierced by the cold beams, which made their bodies stiffen and explode into silver sparks. The two serpents were having a great time fighting these soldiers, and the golden serpent cried out happily, "Silver Horn, kill these iron lumps and capture that human cultivator alive. Let's have a nice, warm meal. Our ancestors said that human beings are the most delicious food in the world. We have been living for over 10,000 years, but we have never tasted the taste of a human being." The silver python cried out joyfully as well, "Good. Let's kill them quickly, capture that human cultivator alive and eat him. How dare he say he can subdue us with that tiny body of his? Our ancestors said that our bloodline is noble, and we possess great divine abilities. We will never submit to anyone who is not an immortal." The two great pythons, Gold Horn and Silver Horn, were busy fighting each other, and did not see that Xiao Kuo had fallen into Wu Qi's hands. Wu Qi shook his head. The spirit-breeding ring on his finger emitted a beam of white light, from which came 1,000 longbow men, each standing 1,000 feet tall, roaring and rushing towards Gold Horn and Silver Horn. Quickly, they formed into the heavenly 100 spirit warring formation. A vast white mist rolled up from the ground and enveloped the entire flat ground. A series of loud clanking noises rang out as the dozens of soldiers summoned by Xiao Kuo were torn to pieces by the longbow men. After that, the miserable howls of the two great pythons could be heard coming from the white mist. Gold Horn roared, "How much delicious meat do you have?" Then came Silver Horn's shrill howl, "So much delicious meat, but why is it so disgusting?" Not long after, the two pythons howled miserably at the same time, "Help, stop fighting. My life is going to be lost because of you. What are you trying to do?" Abruptly, the white mist dissipated, and Long Yuan and another longbow man, who was the biggest among them, walked out, dragging two giant pythons in their hands. Long Yuan and the others swung the two giant pythons, which were over 100 feet long, around their fingertips, like children playing with earthworms. The two boas were badly shaken, dizzy, and had their eyes blurred. Their bones let out a creaking noise, and they screamed and screamed, as shrill as their voices could be. Wu Qi looked back and shook his head. "Long Yuan, be careful. Although they are more than 10,000 years old, they look like children who haven't grown up yet. Be careful, don't really hurt them." Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, Long Yuan and the other longbow man loosened their grip. The two great pythons raised their heads, staring at Wu Qi with tears in their eyes. There was an indescribable emotion in their eyes. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi turned to the two great pythons and said, "I don't want you to be my mounts. Be my pets, and I'll bring you out of this damn place. I'll also bring your ancestors' bones out, and I'll find a place with good feng shui to bury them. Be obedient, and you'll be rewarded in the future. Otherwise, I'll make you one of the ingredients of the 3 whip soup and stew you." The two great pythons looked at each other pitifully, then Silverhorn asked carefully, "May I ask, what is the 3 whip soup?" Impatiently, Wu Qi explained the specific meaning of the three-whip soup. After that, both great pythons cried out together, "We surrender! We surrender! Senior immortal, master, we surrender!" Obediently, both great pythons opened up their nascent souls, and even forced out a thread of their prime blood essence. Without hesitation, Wu Qi cast a restrictive spell in Goldhorn and Silverhorn's nascent souls using a restrictive spell found in the Scroll of Stealing, and subdued them. After that, Long Yuan and the others left Goldhorn and Silverhorn and began to work diligently. One by one, they picked up the flood dragon skeletons that piled up into a small hill on the grassland, and stored them into the black dragon spirit ring. Under Wu Qi's guidance, Long Yuan and the others simply grabbed the entire grassland with a divine ability unique to Longbow people, and sent them into the spirit breeding ring. Two great pythons coiled up beside Wu Qi. Shaking their heads, they looked at Long Yuan and the others, who were busy working nearby, and shouted at the top of their lungs, "That is the tailbone of our great-grandfather. A piece of bone has fallen off there. Hurry up and put it back together. Be careful. That is the skull of our first ancestor. You bunch of big meats, why did you knock down our first ancestor's horn? Be careful. Our first ancestor was the Mount of Immortal Tsang Ao in those years, and he has a very noble status." Amidst the nagging of the two great pythons, Long Yuan and the others finally cleaned up the grassland, then hurriedly returned to the spirit breeding ring. The two great pythons were two chatterboxes, and they would go on and on for half a day just because of a minor mistake. How could the Longbow people, who were simple and honest, withstand their nonsensical attacks? Seeing that the Longbow people had returned to the white light, Goldhorn and Silverhorn immediately turned their attention to Zhaokua. The two great pythons poked their heads out, stuck out their long tongues, and licked Zhaokua's face for a while. After that, Goldhorn nodded his head and said, "Our patriarchs did not lie to us. I've smelled the intoxicating fragrance of meat. Meat, what does it taste like? Especially the meat of human cultivators. Ah, what a beautiful day." Saliva was dripping down from the corner of Silverhorn's mouth. He turned to look at Wu Qi and said, "Senior immortal, can we eat him?" Looking at Goldhorn and Silverhorn, who were drooling with desire, Wu Qi asked in astonishment, "You haven't eaten meat for over 10,000 years? The two great pythons twitched their lips, then opened their huge mouths and spat out a poisonous gas towards Wu Qi. Goldhorn said bitterly, "Smell it, smell it. You can only smell the fragrance of grass from the fruit, and not even the smell of meat. We've been living here for over 10,000 years, and we can't even get out of the courtyard. Ever since our parents were killed by a restriction 9,000 years ago, we haven't even seen a living creature." Silverhorn fixed his gaze at Zhaokua, wagged his head and said, "We only eat meat. As for the rest, such as the ingredients for the three-whip soup, we can leave them to you, Senior Immortal. We're more interested in meat, and we're afraid that we might get a stomachache from eating those strange and exotic things." Right at this moment, Wu Qi removed the restrictive spell on Zhaokua's head. With that, Zhaokua regained his five senses and the ability to think. Upon hearing Silverhorn's words, Zhaokua instinctively looked down at his lower body. Then, the first thing he saw was the spirit-restricting rope, which was glinting with a faint purple gleam. After a brief moment of silence, Zhaokua said coolly, "An immortal item." Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "An immortal item, and a pretty good one at that. It was crafted by a 33rd tier heaven immortal. In other words, as long as I inject sufficient energy into it, even a 33rd tier heaven immortal or an immortal 3 tiers higher can be completely imprisoned by it. General Zhaokua, you are just an early-stage nascent divinity cultivator, aren't you?" Reaching out his hand, Wu Qi took off the storage ring from Zhaokua's finger. Right in front of Zhaokua, he easily removed the restrictive spell on the ring, then poured out all the middle grade, upper grade, and supreme grade energy stones. Nodding satisfyingly, Wu Qi shoved all the energy stones into the black dragon spirit ring. After that, he went through Zhaokua's storage ring and found a few wild buffaloes, which had been cleaned and skinned. Hastily, Wu Qi grabbed the few wild buffaloes and threw them over to Gold Horn and Silver Horn. Like a pair of hungry wolves pouncing on their prey, the two brothers opened their mouths wide and lunged towards the few wild buffaloes while hissing wildly. Each of the huge buffaloes weighed 4,000 to 5,000 kilograms, and they were able to devour them with just one mouthful. When the bison passed through their necks, they could still vaguely see the shape of the bison, but when the bison reached their stomachs, only a few weird goo-goo noises could be heard, after which, the bodies of the two boas turned back to their original shapes, as if they had never eaten anything. Beads of cold sweat rolled down from Zhao Kuo's forehead as he said bitterly, "I like to eat meat and wine, so I brought these wild buffaloes to the immortal abode to prepare for the unexpected. They sure have a good appetite." The two great pythons slithered slowly around Zhao Kuo, while their long tongues kept licking his body. A great amount of saliva sprayed out from Gold Horn and Silver Horn's mouths as they fixed their eyes on Zhao Kuo, soaking his clothes and armor. Zhao Kuo breathed out a long sigh, looked at Wu Qi, smiled bitterly, and said, "It seems there is no enmity between me and Duke of Tianyun. So, Duke of Tianyun should not attack me." Wu Qi said coolly, "There is no enmity between you and me, but there is enmity between me and Zhao Ling. I've already killed him, and also killed over 300 men from Great Zhao. So, it's not a big deal to kill you." Patting on Zhao Kuo's cheek, Wu Qi chuckled and said, "General Zhao Kuo's muscles are plump, so I reckon they must be very chewy. Gold Horn and Silver Horn, a supreme delicacy like General Zhao Kuo should be tasted carefully. You should nibble on him carefully, and never swallow him, as that is a disrespect to the general." Gnawing, not swallowing. Gold Horn and Silver Horn opened their mouths wide, revealing the rows of sharp, venomous fangs that nearly filled every inch of their mouths. Cold sweat broke out from Zhao Kuo's forehead at an even faster rate. He looked helplessly at Wu Qi, smiled bitterly, and said, "Zhao Ling. I knew he would not have a good ending for colluding with Lu Buwei, but I didn't expect it to come so soon. That old fool, Lu Buwei, only knows how to order people to risk their lives, but he himself, Duke of Tianyun, for the sake of Zhao Ling, how unwise is that?" Wu Qi sneered and said, "Who would know that I'm the one who killed so many men from Great Zhao?" Zhao Kuo fell silent. Hesitantly, he raised his head and looked at Wu Qi, smiled bitterly, and said, "Then, do you really have the courage to kill me?" Suddenly, a beam of purple light spread out from between Wu Qi's brows. Soundlessly, the cold electric mirror shot out a thunderbolt and smashed viciously onto Zhao Kuo's forehead. Zhao Kuo let out a miserable howl, as his entire face was nearly burned to ashes by the thunderbolt. Indifferently, Wu Qi said, "Who do you think you are? Why would I not dare to kill you?" Finally, the severe pain on his face faded away. Laughing bitterly, Zhao Kuo said, "Duke of Tianyun, what's the reason for sparing my life?" After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi suddenly put on a very pleasant smile and said, "General Zhao Kuo, Wu Qi feels like an old friend to you at first sight. I feel that you are a wise and mighty man, a graceful and elegant man, a man that is rarely seen in the world." Wu Qi dared not to belittle himself, as he considered himself a hero that was rarely seen in the world. "Therefore, why don't we make an oath to the heaven, swear a blood oath, cut off a chicken's head and burn a yellow paper, and become sworn brothers of life and death? What do you think?" The sword of greedy wolf was thrust out amidst a dark beam, pressing firmly against Zhao Kuo's forehead. With a cold voice, Wu Qi said, "Either you become my brother, and in the future, you and Wu Qi can communicate through voice and aura, advancing and retreating together, or I'll destroy your nascent divinity and let you be slowly eaten away. Make your choice, I'll count to 3. Before Wu Qi could start counting, Zhao Kuo had already burst into a loud laughter and said, "Just as I expected, Duke of Tianyun and I feel like an old friend to each other at first sight. Why don't we become sworn brothers? In the future, you and I will work in 2 different immortal sets, communicating through voice and aura, advancing and retreating together. Isn't that great? How difficult it is to find a bosom friend in life. How fortunate it is for me to meet brother Wu Qi today." Wu Qi laughed out loud. Patting on the chest of Zhao Kuo, who was over 2,000 years old, he said, "My good little brother." Zhao Kuo laughed out loud as well and said, "Zhao Kuo offers greetings, elder brother." Both men looked into each other's eyes and laughed out loud. However, there was not even the slightest hint of a smile in their eyes. Both of them looked exactly the same, their eyes cold as ice and sharp as blades. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.